are Lord of the
Lord
Rings.
of the Rings.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Which ring are you?
This is Fellowship.
Which
My
ring
name's
are
Two
you?
Towers.
You got the
and-
king.
Let's
Yeah,
do
let's
it.
go to the
Let's
king
do
over
it.
here. We're gonna end up lining up to the wrong clap because there's so many. 1, 2, 3.
We made it.
We're here.
Yeehaw.
We
We're
made
at
it to the end of the
podcast.
book.
We made it.
Ish.
Well, ish. Yeah. Actually, it's nice. None of us made it to the end of the book,
Yeah, yeah.
but in a sense, we're all close.
We're all finished.
It's
Yeah.
like we're having one last check-in before the finish
Right.
line.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
the ring has been destroyed.
Right,
Mhm.
right.
Sure
So we're all
has.
good.
They dropped it into the bucket. Bloop,
Yep.
bloop.
And then the volcano exploded.
Yeah. So, I think I don't know when you started, but originally Paul, a couple months ago, started reading Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Probably in like November, December, or something.
Yeah.
And David and I went on our big trip, and like I think it was just like a day or two before you like brought us over some books.
Yeah, I brought you a bunch of books.
Yeah, and then we were like, what are we gonna read when we're out there? We're gonna be out in the desert. We're gonna be, bad Wi-Fi and everything. And so then, like last minute, we decided to read Lord of the Rings. We bought a couple of these copies in Joshua Tree.
Nice.
I ended up actually reading because I read really fast. I read the Silmarillion and the Hobbit before.
Oh, yeah. Now I remember. You read the Silmarillion when you got there. You
Yeah.
started.
I started,
Or you started
the
when
day
you left.
before we got to Joshua Tree.
Okay, right.
We were driving through, or maybe when we were driving through Colorado, and I started reading it, and we were listening to the Fellowship soundtrack
Yep.
on the way
Yep.
out.
Yeah.
I
and
think
it
he
was
still
great.
passed me, too.
Yeah,
Yeah, he
at one
passed. He
point.
blew us out of the water.
Yeah.
right?
I
Even
well,
with that, reading 2 extra books.
Yeah, and we were joking the other day. I should have like not told you guys and read them all twice.
Yeah.
Because I probably, if I had tried really hard, I probably could have done that.
You could have just lapped us pretty
Yeah.
easily.
I've been on the last. I basically stopped reading the last chapter like a week and a half ago because
Yeah.
I blew past you guys and then I
You,
realized
you didn't
I
want to
kinda,
finish without us.
Yeah, I wanted everybody to kind
Well,
of.
if you
That
think
was
about
nice
it,
of you.
if you
Yeah.
think about it, somebody's got to finish first, unless we
Well,
all like
I'm
time it
gonna finish first.
down to
That's
the letter.
Why do you think I keep asking you guys where you are? Once you
Oh.
get, I mean, Paul's really close. I
I'm
might
pretty
finish
close.
it tonight, so he
Nice.
can't beat me.
Damn.
Sorry.
Maybe I'll go read it right now.
Paul leaves.
We'll film it. It's just
I'll be
us
right back.
racing to read as fast as we can.
What happened? I don't
Page
know.
394.
But I won.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. But yeah, so we wanted to do a little retrospective. We all also haven't watched the movies in a long time.
Yeah.
Well, actually, so this was your first time reading the books. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. First time reading any of the books.
Nice.
That's
start to
great.
finish.
Dude, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
I read The Hobbit
Yeah.
when I was younger,
Okay.
and then I think again a couple years ago.
Yeah.
But
Nice.
I haven't read any of the
Yeah.
books.
Nice.
Yeah, The Hobbit's definitely an easier read, and it's like, a very different type of book, but
Yeah.
it's definitely
Yeah.
the gateway book. It's
Yeah.
like
Sure. Yeah.
you read The Hobbit and you're like, man, this guy writes great.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
you
Well,
get,
and it's fun.
you get the world, and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's
Well, what killed me was that I picked up the Silmarillion like way back when
Yeah.
I was like
Yeah.
just starting college or something.
you
and I
know
was
you know
like,
who did that is David Chan. He
Yeah.
did the same thing where he's like, well, I got to start at the first
Yeah, I
book,
gotta
which is really the
understand all the-
Silmarillion, because
Yeah.
it's like the origin of the universe. But it's like,
I would not recommend.
yeah, it's like
Yeah.
reading the Old Testament before the New Testament. Like, you
Yeah.
just start with the New Testament. Like, don't
I don't even know if it's
overcomplicate
like
it.
that because
You go back,
I
you
don't
start
know.
reading Deuteronomy.
It's like
you're
reading the
you
dictionary
get to
before you
Deuteronomy
learn
and you're like,
English.
I can't keep this up.
yeah,
Whatever.
yeah,
But
it's-
anyway,
yeah. Well, yeah, but the
I read it.
Silmarillion-
I read it about a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
Somewhere, so
And
yeah, you got to check
and
it
I
out
had
next.
I had
Okay,
never
okay.
read the Silmarillion. It was amazing.
Mm.
It
Oh,
was
this was your
really
first
good.
read
This
of
was
it.
my first read. Well, no, I
You read half of it or
I
something.
think maybe I had read it before and I just didn't remember because I went on Goodreads I was like, when we were on Joshua Tree, I logged back into my Goodreads account from like 10 years ago,
Yeah.
and I had all these crappy fantasy novels, but the Silmarillion was in there, and I had a whole review written out that was like, this book is really good, but it's hard to read and kind of slow in some parts. And I was like, I have no memory of ever finishing this book. I remember starting it, but I was certain that I'd given up, but I was writing as though I read the whole thing. So
you just read it all in a fever dream and
I must have.
one
I must
day when you were 9.
Yeah, and this
You
time I
used to
read it
read
all in
so
a
many
fever dream
books that
in
was
5 days.
Yeah,
in,
exactly.
In Joshua Tree.
Yeah,
Yeah, and then you woke up and you wrote a review.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So
So yeah.
so the Silmarillion was amazing. Yeah, where should we begin talking about these books? You guys have any?
So
should we go chronologic? Should we talk about the Fellowship and then Two Towers and Return, or
yeah, that'd be great.
Sure.
That'd be great. Yeah, so I think we'll start with Paul because it's his first
Oh, cool.
run through of the
Yes.
books.
You
which,
represent the
which
Fellowship?
is a nice fresh look at things.
Cool.
Obviously, you've been a fan of the films forever.
Right.
Yeah.
You know,
Watched them
probably
a trillion times.
probably before us even. I feel
Yeah.
like you were into you got us into them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
At
I
at
remember
whatever
being
point.
terrified of the dead marshes scene
Oh, man.
at your house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I remember one of my first memories of the movies was when they were I think they were previews or somebody was watching it, and there's that one part where Legolas shoots the cave troll with the 2 arrows.
Mm.
And I remember Uncle Steve being there and him being like, "Oh yeah, look at that guy just used 2 arrows. That's pretty cool. He's really good." I don't like,
That's
and then
funny.
I was
Yeah.
scared of the movies like
Right.
back then.
Yeah.
Like remember,
Well,
it
they're
was-
they're intense.
sure.
they're
There's a
really
lot.
scary.
Yeah.
And then I don't know. I think I definitely watched Return of the King in theaters.
Oh, really?
So I don't remember if I
Really?
retroactively watched the other 2.
I guess you got.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't conscious when that was happening. I was
Yeah.
only 5 years old, so
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
so I didn't have that.
But
Yeah, I wasn't. I didn't even like know about them until later on. And even later on, it was like they were kind of scary. So I
Yeah.
was like,
Right.
I mean, just avoid
Yeah.
those. But then eventually, I saw them with you guys,
the
and,
Shellab part.
and then
that
I was
Shellab,
like, wait,
yeah,
these
yeah.
are great. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you know.
But I'm super excited to go watch the movies.
Yeah.
Josiah hasn't seen the movies in like 8 years. Is that right?
Yeah, something like that. So I think in like middle school was the peak of my when I was watching.
You
them
watched
a lot.
them a bunch.
I watched them a bunch, and I watched them a lot, and I was always, I think I read the books a couple times during that, maybe once or twice during that time, and probably in like 9th grade or 10th grade, I was like, I've seen these, I've been watching these too much. Where like I know exactly the next scene is, and I know what and it was like it's getting a little stale, and I was like, I can't let these movies get stale.
Yeah.
These are my favorite books, my favorite movies,
Yeah.
just about, and I was like, I cannot allow these to get old. So I
Right.
just cut myself off, and I was like,
Yeah.
I'm not watching them
Yeah.
until I don't think I set a hard deadline, but it was like I'm not going to watch them for several years.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of like I kept on putting it off because it was like, no, I'm not ready. I'm not going to.
I'm not ready.
No, it's not the time.
Yeah.
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 And I think I just kept on like pushing it off. And then when we decided to read them, I was like, yeah, this might actually be a good time. After, it's the first time I've read them in forever. We went out there and we were reading them, and all 3 of us were reading them at the same time. So I was
Yeah.
like, this is the perfect time
Yeah.
to rewatch the movies.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like I said, after reading them, you've definitely earned a watch. You know,
Exactly.
whatever
Yeah,
your
yeah,
criteria
absolutely.
is.
Yeah, I think that's a good way
you
to think
know,
about
it's
it.
like, yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
And it was great because we just did that with Dune, where we just
Yeah.
watched the movie
Yeah.
or read the book and watched the movie.
Yeah.
And you get
Exactly.
a whole new perspective of like the story and
Yeah.
the artistry of the author and
Right.
the person who created like this world and environment. And that's what I'm going to segue into the first book.
Yeah.
That's what's so unique about the books is that they're so different from the movies.
Yes.
Like everyone's following the same path, but like they're in a different place, you know?
Right.
And
Right.
like everything from like characterization to like where they actually go, the pacing, it's almost like it's like way slower.
Mm.
It's way more taking their time.
Yeah.
And I feel like also like a huge part of it is just like the literacy. It's just like he's like painting these pictures with descriptions of people and places and things.
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Right.
and-
He's
All those
fleshing
good
out the
nouns.
world in the same way
yeah.
that Peter Jackson did with the visuals
Right.
and with the
Mm.
the score and things like that. That
Yeah.
like the plot is only so much of it, right?
Yeah.
So much of what makes those movies great is the fact that they've really thought about the visual style of the elves versus the
Yeah.
orcs, versus, you know, and like you know
Yeah.
the settings and all. It's
Yeah.
it's all done well, and that's what
Yeah.
makes it so
well,
good.
and in a movie, you can look at a scene that's about 5 seconds and take in everything. I mean, obviously, we've seen the movies a bunch of times, so
Yeah.
we've probably put in as much time as it took to read the books.
Yeah,
Right.
But
yeah.
like you take in like, oh, this person's wearing that style of clothing, and
Yeah.
oh, there's banners above the hearth, and
Right.
and then in the book he has to describe all of that
Right.
word for word, so
Yeah.
you're kind of going, and
Yeah.
Right.
building the pictures in your mind, and
Yep.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, it's funny because sometimes those pictures are different,
right,
but then there's the phenomenon of like, well, I've seen the movies, so I kind of have this, predefined image of what Frodo looks like, and as he's talking, it's hard to separate the two.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we could talk about that, like just
yeah,
the
it is.
the difficulty of having a fresh imagination with the books.
Yeah.
Because I was feeling that in particular on this read through, I think, where I was like trying to, think about these characters in their own right or as they're being written.
Without referencing the
without
movie
being
in your
like,
head.
this is in Pippin's voice and
Oh, okay.
imagining him
Yeah,
doing
yeah,
his
yeah.
quips. Even though I feel like they are very close, and that's part of what makes it harder. Is like,
Right.
you
Yeah,
know,
the
they're-
adaptation
they're-
is so
the
good.
adaptation is really good, so
Yeah.
you almost just rely on it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's not necessarily a problem. It's just
Mhm.
it's an interesting thought. Like, what's the differences here? What is the difference in Tolkien's mind versus Peter Jackson's mind? Like, is
Right.
there subtle changes in description or whatever?
Yeah.
Particularly with like Aragorn, I think he
Aragorn's
comes
an
off a
interesting
little
case.
different. And
Yeah.
then Denethor later
man.
on is
Yeah, we'll get to
is
Denethor.
quite
Wow.
different. I
Yeah.
think.
Well, I think that all of the characters sort of, for me, were floating in and out of the movie description and then the book,
Yeah.
Yeah.
as I was reading it, because it's kind of like there are quotes directly
Yeah.
from the
Yeah.
book in the movie. It's not like Dune where it's lockstep, like almost every word is taken directly from, it's definitely like Jackson took a lot of creative liberties, which
Right.
were amazing.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I don't remember because I haven't seen it, and
Yeah.
I can't wait to watch it again
Me
to see
too.
that.
Yeah.
But like, the movie's
It-
still
it's
pretty
like
fresh.
it comes in and out of
Yeah.
sync with it.
Yeah.
Where I remember when you were reading Fellowship, when you were pretty early in it, you mentioned how the whole scene where Bilbo, where he gives his speech at his 111th
Yeah.
birthday,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
he's like,
Well,
111th birthday, and he's like, and when he's giving that speech, and he's like, it is my time to go,
Yeah.
goodbye now, whatever.
Yeah.
That scene is almost exactly
proud feet.
proud.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, so yeah, I was reading that section, and he's listing, Tolkien's listing off all the people that were in attendance, and the,
Yeah.
the Proudfoots, and the, all the different
The
families,
Bolgers
the
and
Bolgers, the Buffins,
the Boffins, yeah.
and I was like,
Hornblowers.
I was like, Peter Jackson did such a good job with the dialogue in
Yeah.
the scene by
Yeah.
listing them off and showing their traits.
Yep.
And then I get further down the page, and then I'm literally reading the script of the movie, like.
Yeah, that's
And,
what, it's
and
what
almost
it feels like. Yeah,
like seeing the shots.
Yeah.
It's almost as if Tolkien like laid out the shots themselves.
yeah,
Like the shot where he has his feet on the table and
Yeah.
then he's like proud feet.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it says like he
it
had
said
his
it
feet on the
exactly.
table.
Well,
And, like,
let me find it.
And it's just like
That's why we get the books here.
it's almost like amazing that they were so loyal, but it makes sense because it's such a great scene in the book. It's like, why would you do it any way different?
Yeah.
It's like,
But then
You
there's
can't
also
improve
like
on
just huge chunks that are taken out.
Yeah.
Right.
And things are way
Yeah.
sped up.
Yeah.
Like there's no Tom Bombadil
Yeah.
in the movie
I
at
know
all.
it's
Right.
And
it's crazy.
actually, going back to Aragorn and Strider, I remember some of my childhood friends, their dad had like read the books, so they were a little bit more into like the connections between the books and the movie, and they would tell me like, oh, in the books this is that. I don't think they had read it, and I was
Yeah.
not about to read it
Right.
at that time,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
like like they called him Strider. I don't think they call him Strider in the movie. I think there's just like one little thing where they say
They mention it.
they mention it
Maybe
but,
once or
but
twice.
like
Yeah.
and then in the books there's so much more of a description of like the Rangers and how
Yeah,
they
yeah,
like
the
are
Dunedain.
in charge of like keeping these realms safe.
Yeah.
And like how they're just and when Aragorn is taking them, or Strider is taking them on their journey, and he's like talking about these landscapes like, oh, it's not usually like this. Like normally there's like birds
Right.
and now it's like you get this sense that like there's an evil brewing
Yeah.
and like these landscapes have changed, and that he's like this seasoned person who's
Yeah.
walked these
Yeah.
roads
yeah.
100
Yeah.
times and
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's the kind of thing you can do in a literature
Yeah.
by saying by having this omniscient perspective and saying, well, this was a historical thing. You can't really do that with the movies other than hinting at it with
right.
or, whispers or iconography or whatever. In this, you can literally say these were the mounds of the old kings, and
Yeah.
you'd have to put a line in the movie,
Kingdom
and
of
in the movie
Arnor.
you have to be very careful with your dialogue because you only have so long.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
the amount
Doing a bunch of exposition, it comes off as clumsy unless
honestly,
you fine tune it
Yeah.
just right. So
honestly, it's amazing they've fit as many of parts of the book in the movies as they
I
have,
can't believe it.
and
yeah.
still kept it.
I mean, they're
not
long movies, but like,
overwhelming.
they're way
there's
longer
so many
books.
words in this book. You know,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and not only are there so many words, but every word matters.
Mhm.
And like I I'm like reading some of this book like at work or whatever, like on a break, or
Yeah.
when I'm tired
little
before
snips.
bed
Sure.
or whatever, or little snippets. But then there will be those bouts where I'm just sitting on the couch and it's completely silent and there's no one around, and I'm just like diving in,
Yeah.
and I'm able to just like be right in there, and every
Yeah.
word is like, oh, it's like
Yeah.
I'm like
It's
eating
like-
a nice meal.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
like, shit, I have to reread these books just
I know,
in the,
yeah.
Yeah.
But
I already want to reread them. Just talking
Yeah.
about them, I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, there's probably all this stuff I like missed and stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and you can easily like reread sections. Like I would do that
Yeah.
sometimes.
yeah,
I do this a lot with books where I realize I'm losing focus, or
Yeah.
I was thinking about something totally different. While I
Yeah.
read that
Yeah.
page, let me go back
Yeah.
and like you pick up on it, and it's
Mhm.
like I'm probably missing
Yeah.
so many
I found-
interesting little tidbits.
I found that happening to me a lot in this book. Wherever there isn't dialogue.
Yeah.
It was so like there were a lot of times where I read a paragraph like 10 times
Yeah.
because I was just like, my brain like can't. And I think a lot of it is because the writing is a little antiquated at this point.
Definitely,
Tolkien is good at doing like. There's a lot of like
Well, it's
sentences
his
that
style in
like he puts the
particular.
clauses before the
yeah.
Mhm.
thing where like he says like. I don't have any good
Yeah,
example because
yeah,
it's hard to like come up with it, but where like the sentences feel like they're like turned around, and that's what gives it this kind of like old, like ancient feeling in some sense.
Yeah.
And he does that a lot in the Silmarillion too, but for some reason it was really hard to. Maybe it was that it was switching back and forth between it, because when you're reading the dialogue, it's like, they're just talking. It's super easy to follow. Then Pippin muttered, whatever,
Mhm.
But then you have this long description of like whatever Helm's Deep, and I'm like,
Yeah, I had to
you're
look that up.
really,
Like,
yeah,
what does that
like-
look like?
Yeah.
I cannot picture
Yeah.
this.
Yeah,
I mean, we're so lucky. I didn't want to like watch the movies or look at stills,
Mm.
so I was trying to find like illustrations
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
book.
Well,
Yeah.
let's pull out
yeah, we
this
could
guy,
bring up.
which we haven't shown you before.
Oh,
We have
cool.
the Atlas of Middle Earth,
Dude, this
which
book
is a
is
book
crazy.
we bought years ago,
Yeah.
and it basically
Oh
it
my
takes all of
God.
Tolkien's
Like,
old drawings and
Well, these
descriptions
aren't
from
his.
the
These
book.
aren't his drawings.
No, they're not his drawings, but it's based on his drawings.
Yeah.
So the Karen Wynne Fonstad, I
this
believe,
Is, yeah, this is all the Silmarillion.
drew
is
all
first
of the-
bunch of it,
drew
'cause
all of
there's
the
a lot
maps.
of
Yeah, I'm like,
places
I don't
in
recognize
Silmarillion.
any of these.
but they were based
you got-
on
yeah,
Tolkien's.
Oh wow, and this is like
So it's got the Hobbit too.
The Hobbit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. They were based on Tolkien's drawings and based on descriptions of the book.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Yep.
Wow.
And this in most people online, this is like this is probably the definitive atlas. You know what I mean? Like where
That's so
if
cool.
you need to know where something is in or the layout of something, this is what you look to.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and it's
really
funny
good
because none of
research
us
and
were
stuff.
looking at this while we read the
I
book.
really
Yeah.
wish I had.
and
I really wish I had.
and
had it,
I
but-
glanced at it a few times, particularly
Gonna have to
around
dive
Helm's
into
Deep,
this.
Mm.
because that's such a
Yeah, Helm's
a
Deep is.
confusing scene where there's
Yeah.
like the dike and the Hornberg, and you could
Yeah.
you could find it in there, but
Yeah.
Well, and just the whole part of the book, like leading up to that and surrounding it, or
yeah,
you know, there's like you're bouncing back and forth between some
Yeah.
people in Fangorn and then some people who are
Going to Edoras.
yeah, and then like I just remember that whole
Martuscello.
section being sort of like a wash in my
Yeah,
brain.
where I'm like, I don't know where they are, but
But
they're
I'm
in
gonna keep
Rohan,
going.
and they're and I
Yeah.
know they're gonna go somewhere soon. Yeah.
But then there are like those little snippets where it's super cool, like the whole. I loved the part with Merry and Pippin and the orcs, and like I found that was a little different than the movie, and
Yep.
Mm.
just like their relationship with the and well, actually because all the orcs were like different clans that were
Yeah.
fighting
Yeah.
against each
I
other
know
and
that-
causing
yeah.
these internal battles and. You know, like they
Yeah, there's-
kind of do
there's
that
more-
in the movie,
there's-
but
yeah.
it's just so much deeper. Like in the movie, it was like all about the Uruk-hai, were these new
Yep.
breed of orcs
Right.
Yeah.
that Sauron was making.
Yeah.
And then the book, it's not really
It's
that
not really about that. yeah.
pronounced.
Yeah.
It's more like
Although
the orcs
that
are all
does
these
come up,
different
but-
tribes.
yeah.
the Uruks
Well-
are
well,
part of it, but
Was there were the Uruks from Isengard, and then what do they call the ones from Mordor?
Lugders,
Lug- yeah,
Lugbergs,
Lugberg.
yeah, or
Lugbergs
something
or
like
whatever.
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell if the guy's name was Lugbers or if they
I
were
thought it
from
was his- I
Lugbers
thought
or
it
if
was his
they're.
name, but
I think
don't-
Lugbers
but then they were
is like a place in Mordor. That
Yeah.
was the sense I got.
Okay, yeah.
Because he was
Shagrat.
Shagrat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the Bendigo.
More
and the
bag.
ba-
More bag.
More back. We
Yeah.
can we'll look it up.
Oh,
Well,
man.
it's funny because
We got three of us. One of us can
the
be looking
same
for
thing happens, or very similar, in Return of the King when at the Tower of Cirith
yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
where they're like fighting amongst each other, and that's really cool, and it's cool that he emphasized that like even though
You
these
get, like, some
troops
orc
are like
perspective.
a horde being led by Sauron,
Mm.
they have their internal
Krishna.
politics.
Mm.
Ugluk and Krishna.
Wow,
Yeah.
nice find.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great.
Well, and it's like they're so full of hatred,
Yeah,
you know,
Yeah.
for even for each
o-
other.
even for each other.
They're
yeah.
just full of it, you
Right.
know,
right.
living in this
Yeah,
horrible
look,
place.
look at this. So there's the okay. So Ugluk, I think, is from Isengard, right? They're the Uruk-hai, so they can travel during the sun. He goes, maggots,
Oh, yeah.
dear the Isengarders, you're cooked. The Whiteskins will catch you and eat you. They're coming. So they're like he's like taunting the other guy.
Yeah, they're like making
Yeah.
fun of each other and
Yeah,
yelling at
yeah.
each other, and
They're like
Yeah,
you
yeah,
can't. They're like you can't run in the sun.
yeah.
You guys are lame.
so
Well,
cool.
that's another thing I really loved about this reread was the comedy.
Mm.
It was
It's
way funnier
hilarious.
than
Yeah,
I
it's
remembered,
really
and so
hilarious.
many things that I thought where like in the movie I was like, I like how in the movie they made Gimli really funny, and then I get to Helm's Deep and they're playing the game where they're trying to
Yeah.
Yeah,
count
count how
bodies.
many
Yes,
they're
yeah,
shooting and
yeah,
stuff.
and one up each other, and it's just like that's
Yeah.
just brilliant.
Gimli
and, like,
actually is pretty funny.
Yeah, it's not
he's-
like
he's
this
really funny.
serious, dense book that they had to
No.
make funny for a full
Right,
audience. Like,
right.
you know, I was reading online, like on a Reddit or something, about like all the poetry. And someone, like, I was reading, I don't remember what I was looking up. How long does it take to read the books or something dumb like that?
Yeah.
But somebody's like, oh, I read them, but I skip all the poetry and the songs. And then this guy was like, you know, back in my day, like, the way he was like, the author gives you the book, and by starting the book, you're kind of signing up to like let him take you on a journey. Or
Sure,
her,
sure,
you know,
sure.
and like, you know, I can't even imagine reading these without the songs and the poetry. It's such a huge part of like their society.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, and
Well,
I-
you get all this
yeah.
backstory. Like you get. Well, that's one of the things that deepens it is that there's these songs and they're like talking about this stuff. And I got a lot more out of the songs after having read the Silmarillion recently. But it's like it's hinting at this like ancient stuff where Aragorn sings about Beren and Luthien,
Yeah.
who I had just read about in the Silmarillion, and I'm like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, I
Yeah.
understand what this song is about. They get the Silmarillion, they go fight Morgoth and whatever.
Yeah, you
And-
get that whole other
And
layer.
so yeah, the songs add all this like depth to the world, and
Well, and
yeah, it's super cool.
but a lot of the songs aren't even meant to be like understood. I feel like
Yeah.
they're more because they're not all referencing old stuff.
No, no.
There's a few of them that
That's true.
directly
That's true.
like that are directly referencing old stories, which is great. But
Yeah.
but then a lot of them are just like, Sam Gamgee will come up with a song, or
Yeah.
Yeah.
or
Or
like,
when
some
when,
elf will sing some song, and you're like, I don't know what they're talking about, but you kind of get a feeling from it.
There's a couple songs that are in Elvish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna be able to interpret that,
Yeah.
Tolkien. Like
Yeah, you're just
you
reading
put
it
in there
like,
just because it's like.
oh.
I'm like, okay.
Oh, this
I like it.
I
It's
read those
pretty.
like 3 or 4 times. Like, oh, this is really
Yeah.
cool.
They get a lot of THs in there.
Yeah. Like, oh wow,
Yeah.
that's Sildar, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sindar. Whatever.
Sindar, yeah.
Sildar.
Sildar,
Sildar's from
that's
D&D.
D&D.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So, is there anything? We're not really going in order. We're
No,
kind of just
that's
talking all
fine.
over. But is there any topics you guys wanted to talk about from the Fellowship? Or you mentioned Tom Bombadil.
Yeah.
That's one of the big ones because
That's a big
the
one.
the big omission from the movies.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, well, there's always the question of who he is and kind of,
Yep.
Where
does he
does he sit
represent?
in the pantheon of Middle Earth? Like,
Right.
is he a Maya like Gandalf? Is he?
Well, I actually had this quote that I want to pull up.
Ooh,
Okay,
You can keep
great.
talking.
Nice.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
then there's also the question of more of a meta question of why include him, because it's sort of like,
Yeah, he does actually. Well, I'm not sure how much of it is because we're used to the movies, and so because he's not in it, it feels like he's out of place.
yeah, probably.
But I think he does kind of feel out of place.
I think so.
Right?
Yeah.
Because he never comes back. It's not like
Right.
when they meet Treebeard where you're like, whoa, there's talking
Yeah.
trees now.
Well,
Like, what's up with
yeah,
that? It's like no, because that interacts with the bigger plot.
Yeah.
And they interact with Helm's Deep. And
Yeah,
then
in
they're in
particular,
the, next book.
the plot is very interconnected, where you have
Yeah.
these factions that are,
Yeah.
fighting each other, helping each other,
Yeah, different armies
arriving
and
from
stuff.
different places, and like it gets very political in the later books. My guess is just he kind of wrote these, over time, obviously, and his
Right.
idea of what the stories was going to be changed. So maybe it
Right.
started out similar to The Hobbit, where it's kind of like
Yeah,
a
you meet this weird
serialized
guy and then this
adventure.
weird
You
guy.
go,
Yep.
you run into some trolls, you run into this magical Tom Bombadil or whatever, and then eventually he's like, oh, I'll make these kingdoms and
Yeah. Well,
and
yeah, I don't know.
it's hard to,
Yeah, no, I
just
think
pure
that's a really
speculation, but-
a really good speculation. But I think Bombadil adds, he's like a placeholder
yeah.
for like history. Like so much about Middle Earth is about the lore and what happened before, and Bombadil is like this thing that where he like can't leave those woods or something like that, and he's just like he was there way before all that.
Right.
It's just it really hit me how old like this story is.
Yeah.
Like it's not just this one story of Frodo and the ring, and he's constantly reminding us that like there was way more that happened before this. Like it makes it feel like a real living, breathing world like,
Yeah.
like we're in now.
Yeah.
Like it's like got all this history. But there's this quote where Gandalf is talking at the end about how he's like pretty much going to retire. And he said that he's going to go have like a really long talk with Bombadil. And he said, such a talk as I've not had in all my time. He is a moss gatherer, and I've been a stone doomed to rolling, but my rolling days are ending. And like,
Wow.
and that's such
Yeah,
a
I
cool
do
idea that
remember
like,
a little.
that Bombadil and Gandalf are both like similar entities where they're not human. They're like these celestial beings or whatever, but Gandalf is like doomed to rolling. Like he hasn't been able to collect any moss. He's just
Right.
going and helping, and
Yeah.
Bombadil is sort of like collecting lore and gathering moss.
He's a moss
and
gatherer.
like he's like just like
Wow.
kind of a stone that's same as Gandalf, but he's just sort of sitting and collecting, and
Wow.
and that's a really I was like,
yeah, that's
whoa.
cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's
Huh.
that's
pretty
a great.
interesting.
That's
Yeah,
a
I've
great
never
catch.
seen that. Because I've like looked a little into like what do people think what does Bombadil represent?
Yeah.
And I haven't heard that. I've heard people are like maybe he's the he's the incarnation of God in the story, or maybe he's Tolkien in the story.
Well,
and
those
none
are,
of them end
those
up
are almost
fitting very well.
more literal questions. Of
Yeah, like,
where,
what
you
is-
know,
you
what
know,
is
what's-
he?
yeah.
Whereas this is a more philosophical thing. Like
Mm.
they're both these beings out of our comprehension. They're not human, but they have different philosophies about life, right? Like
Yeah.
Gandalf is very active and he feels his duty or maybe his task.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah,
I think
I
he's-
have some.
I think
things
he's
to say about
he's
Gandalf.
sort of been tasked by one of the
Yeah.
by one of the gods
The
the
Valar.
Valar to help humans and stuff.
Mhm.
And there's a question of whether Tom Bombadil's task has a task or
Right. Yeah, that's a
know,
good
and
question.
He's almost also like something for the other people to like look to like gain like respite and hope.
yeah.
Mm.
Because he's just
Yeah.
kind of like living his own little life,
Yeah,
and
and
it's like, oh, this is possible to create perfect harmony in this,
Right.
like Bombadil's doing
and
it,
and
you
he's
know?
he's the master.
Yes.
He's the master of the wood.
yeah,
Yeah. And that's how he functions in the story is as this like respite, like you said. It's
Mm.
like, when they're in the barrows, he comes and he helps them out. He gets them out of a pinch, and he's like, I'm not gonna do this all the time, but I'm here to do that.
and he's
Yeah,
like, I
that's-
can't do it any further than this
Yeah.
area because
Yeah.
this is
This is where I live.
I'm
and-
controlling this spot, but
and I can't
Or I
leave
have
this
rule
spot
over
because
it.
I'm the master of it, and so I'm tied to it. Yeah.
Yeah, on that note, if we want to segue away from Bombadil, we could talk about the use of Deus Ex Machina in the story
Mm.
and how
Yeah, you were bringing this
There-
up a lot about
there's-
Fellowship.
there's constant trials, and oftentimes they're kind of resolved at the last minute, which is usually looked at as a bad thing. But I think it kind of adds to the wonder and the fact that this is almost a destined trip that they could have just gotten killed by Old Man Willow and
Right.
whatever, the Black Riders find the ring in the
Yeah.
water. It could have
Yeah, there's-
ended in a million different ways.
Mhm.
There's so many times where they're saved by just dumb luck, or
Right.
you could call it fate, or
Yeah.
intervention by some higher power like Gandalf, or,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
or the elves showing up, or something like that. And I think it's kind of looked at as a negative usually when characters
Yeah.
get saved in the nick of time. But I think here it's particularly used to show how maybe this task is fated to go about this course. But more in particular, it shows, especially early on, that these characters are very not up for this task.
Right.
Like they are constantly
particularly
messing
the
stuff up.
hobbits, in
Yeah.
Fellowship,
Particularly the Hobbits.
because before they get to Elrond, it's basically
Yeah.
the hobbits, and then
And
Strider.
maybe that's where we could go, is just how funny it is that these heroes are the opposite of the traditional hero who is
right,
strong and knows what to do and figures it out.
right,
These guys are always
Yeah.
messing stuff up,
You-
and
you-
and oftentimes it's just they do something dumb. They make too much noise. They slip. Pippin tells about the ring. Oh, I wasn't supposed to say that. Oh,
yeah.
And it's just like, I think that's
Hmm.
part of what makes these characters so great, is the fact that they're constantly
They're relatable in that way.
messing everything up.
Yeah.
And
Well, and then they barely eke out of it.
Yeah,
you know?
they barely
like,
eke out of it.
with like in Two Towers, right at the end of Two Towers with the Palantir, right?
yeah,
yeah.
Like Pippin does the same kind of deal where he's like, "Oh man, I got to look at that Palantir," and then he checks it out, and it almost is the end of everything
Yeah.
because
Right.
Sauron just looked at him and whatever.
yeah,
But Gandalf's like, "This may actually be a work to our advantage," or
Yeah.
whatever,
yeah.
and it's like. Yeah, they mess it up, but it's just barely they make it work.
Yeah.
Well, and then you can kind of also see the characters change over time too,
Mm.
because it starts out where they're like these cushy food
Yep.
eating,
Yeah, the little tubby,
Hobbits, and
tubby
then-
little hobbits.
and then like pretty soon, not pretty soon, but like Pippin's like a member of the guard,
yeah,
you know,
yeah, he's a squire.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then
Theoden.
like Mary is like riding on horses,
Mary
like
is riding.
fighting in
Yeah.
the big battle,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
pretty cool,
and
you
and
know?
he does, and it's actually interesting because he does it on his own. There,
Right.
it's not even like he's pulled along by Theoden,
Both of
who's like, teach me how to do this or whatever.
yeah,
It-
he
it's
like really has to fight for it.
Yeah, he has to fight for it, and he goes with yeah.
And then Pippin too is like, I pledge myself to your service.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah,
he's like-
just
and Gandalf's like, oh
Gandalf's like,
God,
oh,
what
shit,
is he
this is-
doing?
yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But then it ends up working out in the end.
Right,
Mhm.
and they are that's their that becomes like their
I
calling.
want to talk about the Shire, but you haven't read it yet, so I
We
don't
can
wanna,
talk about it.
Yeah,
I mean-
Scouring of the Shire.
Yeah, well, that is. I think you were saying that's like it's like the perfect
It's the
bow on the
culmination.
end of the whole story.
Yeah.
Because you have these. It starts off with the hobbits. It's centered around the hobbits.
Yeah.
You know, I think the movies are a little more looking at the like Legolas and Gimli and stuff almost more evenly
Yeah.
than the books. The
Yeah.
books are pretty much they're a little more centered on the hobbits.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time they get back to the Shire, they have actually accumulated all this experience.
Well, yeah, and they're like, I'm a knight from that serves the king, you
Yeah.
know, and the
Yeah,
guy's
yeah.
like, whoa.
the guy's like, I didn't know there was a king.
yeah,
even," you
and
know?
they're
yeah.
then they're like going from these little mess up guys to like
Yeah.
these big
yeah. Well, and,
armor clad, chainmail wearing.
Yeah, they ride back
sword.
into Hobbiton,
Yeah.
and they're like, oh yeah, I guess it's weird that we have swords with us.
Yeah, they're like
I'm used
nobody's
to it
ridden
now."
up on us on the road. Like it seemed pretty safe, and they're like, well, you're all like wearing armor and
Yeah, and you look badass.
you look like you
Yeah.
just
You have like a shield.
dunked a
from-
ring into lava.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Frodo's missing a finger.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So yeah, that is
Yeah.
a really cool. That's kind of the best part about that, as the ending is
I'm
that.
gonna make some tea.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I don't even know what the last chapter's about, the Grey Havens, because
Right.
you guys both have read it. but
I
even got
haven't
them.
read it in
I
a
don't
long
really
time,
remember.
so I'm interested to see what else is in there that I don't remember.
Did you have more to say about the God saving?
Oh yeah, Deus Ex
I-
Machina thing.
I just think it's such a big part of the way he writes
The way
is-
everything gets resolved.
is the constant repeating motif of there's danger, they mess it up, right? They do the wrong thing. You know,
Yeah.
usually it'd be like, here's a trial and they figure it out, you know. No, they mess it up horribly.
And then somebody else
and then
saves them.
somebody else saves them.
Yeah.
Or some luck befalls
Yeah.
them. It didn't go as bad as it could have.
Right.
And I think that keeps you on the edge of your seat, and it keeps you wondering, like, man, like how are they getting through all
Yeah.
this? And like,
Yeah.
good thing Gandalf showed up
Yeah.
at that
Well-
time.
Well,
and like,
one of the biggest
adds to
ones
the tension.
is the actual destruction of the ring. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
the timing
actually.
is perfect, and there's no
Right.
communication. It's like I don't know.
You mean with Sméagol?
Well, I wasn't even thinking of Sméagol. I
Oh.
mean, like
Oh.
on a large scale, how basically,
oh
all
yeah, we
after
could talk about
after
that.
the battle at Minas Tirith, all the forces. There's the last debate, right?
Right.
The chapter, the last debate,
Yeah.
and they're like, we just won this battle, but Sauron still has. That was like a tenth of his army. He'll just wipe us out in 2 months or whatever.
Yeah.
So they're like, the only thing we can do is we're just hoping on Frodo and Sam. They're like, that's our only hope is Frodo and Sam. And they're like, and we don't know where they are.
And they're like, we're gonna go.
we heard
mess him
Faramir
up
said they were
before-
over there, but we don't know where they are now. You know, they're
Right.
going through the most dangerous, the pass of the spider. It's like,
Yeah.
it's like all we can do is march to the Black Gate and
Yeah.
challenge Sauron with the hope that he'll be intimidated by
Yeah.
Aragorn, right? And
Right.
it's like this thread of hope where they're basically bluffing that Aragorn has the ring, right? Because he looked in the Palantir and he basically said, "I have the ring,"
Which is amazing.
which is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not in the movie.
And not in the movie. Well, I think it's in the movie.
I don't think Aragorn looks into the Palantir and
He-
challenges Saruman.
He
or
does,
Sauron
he
in the
does,
movie.
he
Really?
does.
Yep.
It's not. I don't think
I
it's
guess I don't
emphasized as
remember.
much as it is in the book.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of it's a little bit.
It's like a
tamped
short
down.
scene where he looks into it and then he like shows him Enduril.
Oh.
He like holds up
Debate.
Enduril,
Free force,
and then
whatever
like
he says.
Sauron's like, "Wah," or whatever.
Yeah, well, so basically,
Yeah, I
yeah,
don't
Sauron
remember.
gets pissed because he's like,
Yeah.
"Oh man, I
Yeah.
guess there are still."
But it's not
strength
it's
in
not
men.
emphasized as like a strategic decision where he decides at that moment he should reveal himself.
Yeah.
It's more just like, bitch, I got a sword.
yeah,
Did he,
exactly.
did
yeah.
he,
Which
like,
isn't as quite as
it's
effective.
not quite as
still
effect- yeah.
cool, but it's in this. It's like
It doesn't have
wow,
the punch.
He felt now is the time that they needed to make a move.
Yep.
And you're just like, oh crap, he's
And-
got strategic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and,
but
you know,
they're all
wisdom.
doing it on just totally blind. They're
Yeah.
just like, I mean, the only hope is Frodo and Sam
Yeah.
because we actually don't have the ring.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well, yeah.
And the craziest thing is that they march all their forces out, and they basically arrive at the Black Gate at the same time that Frodo and Sam arrive at Mount Doom.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the
Well,
timing
and then,
works out.
And then the other crazy thing is that Frodo was not gonna drop the ring in.
oh yeah,
Sam was gonna
yeah,
have to kill Frodo.
Yeah.
But Sméagol comes out of nowhere.
yeah.
Yeah.
This burden they've been carrying this whole
Yeah.
time
Yeah.
Dude,
comes out of nowhere and bites his finger off and
Yeah.
falls into the
Yep,
lava and
yep.
sacrifices himself.
yeah,
Yeah.
Not on purpose.
right.
Yeah.
But like,
He-
you
yeah,
know,
but- yeah.
it was
Wow,
about
yeah,
to
I
be an
didn't
even
even-
deeper.
I didn't even consider the fact that Sam would have had to kill Frodo.
He would have.
He would
Yeah.
have.
There was
he would
no.
have done it.
He probably would have had to kill himself and
Yeah.
Frodo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, because wasn't he saying like Frodo was stronger than him, like,
Well,
with the power of
well,
the ring?
with
Well,
the ring, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
mean-
totally. Well, no, yeah. The point is he wouldn't have been able to kill Frodo because Sméagol's there. I mean,
Yeah, maybe,
yeah,
maybe
it's,
not.
it's hard to
but
come up with a hypothetical.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
No, but yeah, very likely.
It would have been a mess.
It would have not been good.
It still was a mess.
yeah, it
Yeah.
still was a mess.
It would
Yeah.
have been a
But-
bigger mess.
But I don't know if we want to go into it now, but I want to talk about Sméagol because
Okay.
he ties into one of the biggest themes that I got out of this read of the book.
Yeah, yeah.
If you have anything to say.
Yeah, finishing on this topic, just the fact that today, or maybe not today, but it's a very rare technique, I think, to make things work out so perfectly. Because you could criticize the book for being like, well, they just so happen that Sméagol shows up at the perfect time, and like
Yeah.
Gandalf shows up at the perfect time, and like it happens like 20 times.
It happens
30 times
every
in the book.
chapter.
Yeah,
the
it's almost
same
every
kind of
chapter
move.
some
Yeah.
kind of, luck befalls them that is
Right.
random. But I think it's not like
Oh, I
it's not
yeah.
supposed to be realistic as much as it is like poetic.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Well, I
it's
also
like a way
think
of
that it's not as hard to see because it's like these beings that have been doing this thing for a long time. Like I feel like the people who mostly save the hobbits are like
They're pros.
Gandalf
Yeah.
and they're
Yeah, the
pros,
elves,
Right.
yeah.
or Strider, who's
I mean,
like,
he's like 90.
he understands how the world works
Yeah.
yeah,
and how to live
yeah.
in it like
Yeah.
alone and
Right.
hostile and
Yeah.
fight and these guys. So to us as the reader, it looks like holy moly, they're just like about to die.
yeah.
And then these guys are like, yep, you accidentally did this wrong. Let me
Yeah.
help
Yeah,
you.
let
Let
me-
me
yeah,
save
let me
your
fix
life.
Right. It
you know?
it just demonstrates how ahead
Proficient.
of the curve they are, and
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
they're on this whole other level.
And then also like the stakes are so high.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also like it's not just the little fellowship, it's like the elves, like the race of men, like it's like these big groups that are like fighting to not be demolished by
Yeah.
evil.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's some massive forces at play
Yeah.
that are like
Well, and
Yeah.
that makes their contribution so much more impactful.
Yeah.
When Mary stabs the Night King,
yeah.
you're just like
The Night King?
the Night King,
The,
yeah,
the
Witch
Witch
King,
King,
the Witch
Witch
King,
King,
yeah.
not the
That's
Night
funny.
King.
Get out of here, Game of Thrones.
He flies through the air and
Yeah.
stabs
Oh,
him.
Yeah,
no.
she
and
lands on his
shatters-
back out of nowhere.
No.
No, but like when he stabs the Witch King
Yeah.
and like kills him, that's like the biggest move in the whole
Yeah.
battle.
Well, Eowyn kills him. But he stabs
He
him.
stabs him in the-
You're
in
right,
the leg.
you're
He
right,
stabs him in
you're
the back
right.
of the knee.
well,
And he
but
breaks his arm.
it-
He
it-
stabs
yeah.
him and he goes.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It doesn't necessarily matter though. It's
Well,
he played
no,
a
yeah.
decisive role
He
Yeah.
saved
against the most
saved Minas Tirith
powerful
in that
enemy.
moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like just I guess another theme that like these little people can play a part
Right.
in this bigger picture,
That's
even
almost
though
the whole like
they're so
shtick of
they're so stupid
having
and
hobbits in
weak
your
and,
story.
and almost
and homie.
messing up
Yeah.
everything. They can
Yeah.
they can still it's
Contribute.
Just,
They're
it's
like
just so inspiring, like
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
like nothing else.
Yeah.
Well, and then
so good.
also on another level, I think just with Frodo's character. Well, we can talk about this when we talk about Sméagol.
Yeah.
But quick aside with Mary stabbing the Witch King. Also, it's interesting how powerful these evil characters are. Like with their they're almost like the magic where like his arm doesn't work for like a while.
Yeah.
And then like when Frodo gets stabbed in the shoulder, when he rides back through. They say that for like 2 days when
Yeah.
he's riding through that area again on the way back to the Shire,
Weathertop,
he's
yeah.
like feeling like shit. Like his arm still hurts. He can feel the wound again.
Yep.
Like he feels like the world is dark, and it's
He's
like,
like
wow.
he's like depressed
For like a
days, and
couple
he's, like,
days
got
on his
hood
way
up.
home.
Yeah.
And then and it's just like these forces of evil are like
Are
so
so-
powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like it just the book's constantly hammering that in, and,
Yeah.
and it makes it feel like the stakes are real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
like and
totally.
just like with them riding through these different places, and like right now we can hear like all these birds and all this stuff. It's so scary to walk through this place again and have it be completely silent and everything
Yeah.
be dead.
Yeah.
Like just thinking about those, and he paints it so
right.
well.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
For sure.
yeah.
Yeah, well, and like when the over Minas Tirith, they like faintly
It's like
hear a
always night.
Nazgul,
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
and people are like going crazy.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
like running away,
Yeah.
like guards and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just like they just know they can feel that there's a Nazgul like flying above
Yeah.
the city, and they're like, it's like wreaking havoc.
And you
just
can't
all-
paint that in the movie.
I was
In the
just- I
movie,
was
it's
just gonna say,
like
yeah.
it's like oh, it's a
It's a scary thing.
it's a
It's like,
scary
yeah, that's kind of a scary
dragon-looking
noise.
thing.
Yeah.
But you can. He's like letting you know how these people are
Yeah.
feeling.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
much more
Yeah.
psychological, and like
Yeah.
you're getting in the minds of these people, and like
Yeah.
the horror and the look of the sky and the
Wow.
despair.
Well, and the
and-
part that is in the movie where they fling the heads.
yeah.
Oh.
Oh,
I forgot about that
I
until
know.
I was reading, and I was like, oh
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh
really.
my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah. The catapult full of
Yeah.
heads of the soldiers of Gondor.
Yeah.
Oh
Like,
my
well,
what
God.
and
a
there's so
genius
many.
move.
Yeah, there's so many brilliant moments where you're like, that's why it's so good in the movie, is because it's
Yep.
so good in the book.
He's
Yeah.
like, it's worse than throwing flaming
Yeah.
stones. It's
Yeah.
like
Because it just destroys your
Yeah.
courage. Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think hitting the psychological thing, that was something that I remember we were talking about when we were in I think when I was reading Fellowship, was just how when they're traveling, like there's these constant little like undulations of like their like of how they feel about the journey, right?
Yeah.
Where they'll be like walking along and they're
The
like,
description.
it was a lovely day, and and the trees were singing, and the birds were chirping, and whatever, and he's like going on, and they're like, so they sat and ate a little lunch, and they had a nice day, and then they kept going, but then it got stormy, and they all felt like crap, and they didn't really want to keep going, and so
Yeah.
he does this little thing, and it's like, I can relate to that every time I've ever gone on a hike. I've
Yeah.
had both of those times where you have the part of the hike where you're like, oh, I'm feeling great. And then you have the part where you're like, I want to eat something.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, and it
Yeah, or
seems
when
like
it's like raining for days and
Yeah,
you just gotta
yeah,
keep
well,
going. Like I've
exactly.
never had that happen, but
Yeah.
like you
yeah,
can kind
that's
of like
it's like a different scale.
Yeah.
But it's like I can relate to just the fact that when I go on a hike up Hadley Mountain and
Yeah.
it's like a couple hours, you go through this up and down thing.
Yeah.
And I feel like that happens constantly in the book where there's like
It's-
there's good and then there's bad, and they like switch back and forth between them.
Yeah, and it seems like superfluous detail where it's
Right.
like, why are you describing they feel crappy again? You know?
Yeah, just
Why-
say they ate lunch and then they walk
Yeah,
for 4 more days.
Yeah, yeah. Why,
and
why-
sometimes he
why-
does.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. But like when he does add these like hour by hour, what the weather is, what the landscape looks like, he's
Lot of
really
la- lot of landscape.
he's tying you in, and like
Yeah.
just kind of it does. I think it's almost subconscious or something, like where like you get drawn in more.
Well, and
by
then
it,
also
yeah.
at those points where he's like, oh, and then they traveled for 4 more days. Part of me is like, oh, phew.
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
another part of me is like, oh man, I kind of want to know how that went.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like you're so attached to
Yeah.
these characters,
Yeah.
and you've been
Yeah.
there for their whole journey.
But that's like an interesting creative decision because like you could describe every journey and you could describe none of the journeys.
yeah,
Where do you decide to
Mhm.
sprinkle in how they're feeling and what
Yeah.
they're thinking about and
Yeah.
the weather and
That's
the shape of the landscape, the layout. Sometimes it
Mhm.
doesn't matter. Sometimes it does because it's strategic.
right.
Sometimes you just describe it for atmosphere. You
Yeah,
know,
right.
there's so many.
It's funny. This is
I feel
all
like he's a
things that
master
come
of it.
into play with D&D, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And it felt that
100%.
way. Our last session was one of the first where we did. Well, it was the first since like the very first session where we actually traveled somewhere. Like
Yeah.
we walked like a couple days of travel, the party, and I kind of was like, I wasn't sure how to deal with that, and it's interesting the way he did it, where it's you kind of have
Yeah.
it's both like fine grain, and then he's not afraid to just be like, you get the idea. A couple days later,
right.
this happened.
It's the same kind of decision you're making. Like, should I
should I elaborate?
include the detail or skip by it?
Yeah. It's always an opportunity, but you don't always have to take it.
It's a risk too.
Right.
Yeah.
It is a risk.
Yeah. That's excellent.
Okay, so
let's
I
have some
wanted to
cheese
talk a little about.
Sméagol.
Yeah, well, Sméagol ties into it. So one of the big things that I noticed happening. Well, Sméagol is kind of like the center point of it. One of the big themes that I feel like I noticed on this read through is the idea of pity, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
And so Sméagol is like the key character to that because he's so, basically he's so pitiful in some sense. He's so awful, and yet Frodo keeps him around essentially. And it starts off essentially the first time that Gandalf and Frodo are talking in the Shadow of the Past in Fellowship. Gandalf is like talking about how Bilbo got the ring, and he's like, yeah, he got it from Sméagol, and he's like, I think Frodo says something like he should have killed the foul creature,
Yeah.
He says it's a pity Bilbo didn't stab the foul creature,
When he
something
had the
like
chance,
that
yeah.
when he had the chance. Because basically Gandalf said that he just realized Sméagol is out and about. He escaped the mountains.
Yeah, spreading
And so
information
he's-
about Baggins's.
Yeah,
and
exactly. And so that's why the name Baggins is around. And that's why Sauron knows, Shire.
Yeah.
So, but Gandalf replies. He says, he goes, pity. It was pity that stayed Bilbo's hand. Pity and mercy. And so there's this moment where Frodo at this point doesn't understand he doesn't know what he's talking about. Right? He lives in Hobbiton. He doesn't know anything about this kind of problem, right? Where you're dealing with a creature who is super tormented and terrible, and he's an evil creature.
Right.
But Gandalf is like, no. It's important that Bilbo spared him, and he actually says, this was the thing that I think you pointed out to me, was he implies that part of the reason that Bilbo was able to resist the ring is because he particularly didn't take it out of a desire to, steal it from Gollum. He didn't steal it from Gollum. In some sense, he found it on the ground, and then he just didn't let Gollum take it from him because Gollum's a creep.
Yeah, so it's emphasized in the text that Gandalf says, like, if he had stolen it in anger, or even
or
if
in
he had
greed.
used it, even if he had killed Gollum
Using it
while in possession of the ring, that kind of an act would have
corrupted him.
corrupted
probably
Bilbo,
strengthened
and
it.
by now he'd be
He'd
evil.
be
It would have taken
he'd
him
be a
over long
Sméagol.
ago. But like because he had never really done anything bad, or
Bilbo.
really
Bilbo
bad,
is, I mean,
he's
Bilbo
pretty
got to lead kind of a peaceful life after
Even
that.
with the
even
ring.
after the events of the Hobbit, he kind of just is like, well, now I settled down, so I just use the ring for like mischief for a little, maybe.
Yeah.
And so so that's a super interesting detail is that the way you get the ring and the way you interact with the ring kind of affects its hold on you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I hadn't ever thought about until this time.
Yeah.
Well, and man, those Bagginses, like, you
Right.
know, Frodo goes back to Hobbiton, and they're like, "Why would you ever leave your house to this guy who ruined the place?"
Right.
And Frodo,
Oh,
The
yeah.
Sackville Baggins.
yeah, the
yeah.
Sackville
Yeah.
Bagginses, specifically that one pimple guy or whatever his name
Yeah,
is.
Lobelia and
Yeah, and
Otho.
Frodo says, "I'm sorry. Like, now that I'm back, all I can do is try my hardest to set things right." And the guy's like, "I couldn't have said it any better myself."
Yeah.
Like, this guy comes, he just like saved the universe,
Right.
and then he comes back to his home, which he sees as destroyed.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Hey, how come you just did that?" And he's like,
Right.
like, you know, he doesn't like lash out at him. He's just like,
Yeah.
"I'm sorry.
Yeah. No.
I'm just gonna try my best."
Yeah, you can tell
and,
that the
and throughout
Bagginses are.
the whole book, his relationship with Gollum, Sam is like, Sam hates
Sam
Gollum.
wants to kill Gollum.
Sam wants to kill Gollum. He wants to Why is he with? And
Yeah.
Frodo's like, hey man, just
Yeah.
chill.
Yeah.
It's fine.
And a
We're just
lot
gonna
of
keep
that.
going.
Yeah.
And this actually that's I'm so glad you said that. That ties exactly into this theme of pity, because basically, so while reading the Silmarillion, it's giving all this backstory, like the large scale stuff where you have the Valar, the gods, and then you have their servants who are the Maiar, right? And that's where Gandalf is from.
He's a Maiar.
He's a Maiar, yeah.
Okay.
It's like a sort of a
he's-
demigod or a servant of the gods.
Yeah,
Cool.
essentially. And so basically, I'll give a very brief explanation. So way back, the gods were like involved in stuff, and then they left, right? And then they said like, we're gonna stop messing around with stuff after they killed like the big bad guy Morgoth. So, but that's all ancient history.
Okay.
And then Sauron comes in, and he's kind of messing around. But the gods have already said, we're never going to go back to Middle Earth and interfere, because I don't know all the reasons, right? But they're like, we're not doing that anymore. So they basically send Gandalf. So his task is basically like, look, Sauron is in Middle Earth, and he's also a Maiar, right?
Oh, Sauron.
Sauron is a Maiar,
Oh,
right? Yeah,
snap.
right.
Yep.
So he's
I didn't know
like. Yeah, he's like a servant of Morgoth, who's like the big
Oh,
guy,
the big baddie.
from the olden days, right?
Yep.
And so basically they send some Maiar, the Valar send some Maiar to Middle Earth to like help guide the people of Middle Earth. And I think, like you were just saying, like we were talking about before with it being Deus Ex Machina, how like, yeah, Gollum just ends up there with him, and he ends up being the one who throws the ring in, really, because he falls in with it. And it's like, how did that work out so well?
Yeah.
And in some sense, it's because Gandalf told Frodo to be pitiful, right? To show mercy
Yeah.
on Gollum, right? And he does that in the second chapter of the third chapter of the whole book, where he's like, no, like it. He basically tells Frodo, I think Sméagol has some part to play in this story.
Yeah.
And Frodo trusts him.
to play.
Yeah. He's like, but Frodo trusts him, and he's willing to be like, he's like, look, I don't know what I'm doing, Sam, but Gandalf said, don't just not
Don't be mean to the
don't be mean to the little guy, right? He's like, and in some sense, he understands him better, right? He's able to empathize with Gollum because he's getting a sense of how awful the ring is, right?
Yep.
So I thought that was a really the other thing that I hadn't even that ties it into pity even more is Gandalf is basically a servant of Nienna, who is like she's basically like the goddess of grief. So she like lives in the halls of Mandos, which are like it's basically like the big tomb in the Undying Lands, right? In Valinor. And it's
also like a temple. Is it
yeah,
like
it's
the
like
temple
a temple
of the gods?
Yeah,
kind of thing?
it's like a temple of the dead, right?
Okay.
So it's where
Okay.
Mandos lives, and
Mandos is the god of
he
the
like
dead?
he like keeps all the spirits there or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
He's like the gravekeeper guy.
Yeah.
And Nienna is basically this Valar who goes there, and she cries there all the time. Like it's like, and Nienna liked to spend her time crying at the tomb. It's like that's like her character.
Sounds like a great day.
But yeah, but essentially Gandalf hung around with her for like thousands of years. You know what I mean? So that was who he hung out with back in Valinor, back in the West. And I just think that's so interesting because, well, it's said in the very beginning of Return of the King when they do there's a brief synopsis of the first two books.
Oh, cool.
And it outright says the Return of the King shows Gandalf's struggle and his strategy against
the Dark Lord.
Against the Dark Lord.
Yeah.
So it almost in the synopsis it says Gandalf is the main guy you should pay attention to in this book. In some sense, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting that his backstory is hanging out with the goddess of sorrow, and he learned mercy and pity from her, and then he puts that into Frodo, and then that kind of propels the whole ending of the ring, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm.
I thought that came through a lot, and like there's so many scenes where Gandalf is talking, and if you read it thinking about he's trying to get these people to be, to empathize or to be
Yeah.
merciful,
Yeah.
it you can see it in his character a lot, and I think
Yeah.
it's just super cool. So that was one of the biggest things I got out of this read through is like just that connection from the Silmarillion, like,
Right.
and it's hugely important to the plot through Gollum in that sense. So yeah, so I don't know if you guys have any
Wow.
thoughts or anything you noticed
That's
along
cool.
those lines, but that was like the thing that I was like, I can't even believe how important this is,
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because, like, well, two things. One is, like, I came into these books knowing the story.
Right.
Yeah.
This is not the first time that I've heard this story and seen it.
Right.
This is like the dozenth.
Yeah.
So
You're 111.
my 111th time. So, like, I know that Sméagol's gonna pop out at the end, or Gollum, and bite Frodo's finger off.
Yeah.
If I was reading this book in like the 80s or whenever they came out, and like all of a sudden this guy pops out of nowhere that's like bites his finger off and falls into the, I'm like, what? That's insane.
Yeah.
And like that's such a crazy thing to come up
Yeah.
with, and these
Yep.
twists and turns and stuff. Like that's such an amazing idea. And then like with Gandalf, raised Christian boy, Christian faith. And like watching all these movies when I was a kid, it's like, oh, Gandalf is God, and like
Right.
Sméagol's your relationship to the devil or something.
Oh.
I don't know. But then like reading the books, like Gandalf's just like a dude
Yeah.
who like is trying to help these people out.
Yeah.
You
And
know?
in a
And
lot of
he's-
ways, you
and-
see his struggle. He's almost a
Yeah.
protagonist of sorts.
Yep.
Where he's like, he doesn't know what to do, and
You see him just so stressed out in so many
Yeah.
places where he's like,
yeah.
well, the big one is when he fights the Witch King at the gate of Minas Tirith,
Yeah.
and then basically I think he's about to be beaten by the Witch King, like
Yeah.
he's just like getting blasted back,
Uh-huh.
and then Rohan arrives, right?
Yeah,
Theoden
yeah,
arrives,
yeah,
and the
right.
Witch King turns around and leaves.
Yeah.
And that was the biggest part where I was like, wow, Gandalf is like in over his head.
well,
Like,
and
Gandalf,
he's old.
Gandalf has so much to do here. Yeah, he's super
He's
old.
like at the end of his time.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
he's mega powerful and
Yep.
stuff, and he's got all the answers, and he fixes a bunch of things, but he's like ready to retire.
Yeah.
He's like the if you go into like the steelworkers shop, and he's like old, and he's got all the projects,
He's
but
all
he's not
squinty.
he's not taking on any big new contracts.
yeah,
This
yeah.
is like his last one. For I don't know.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, to some degree, but in other ways, he's like so powerful.
Yeah.
Like when he rides out and like shines
He
his
does-
light,
he does
the
do
light
that.
at the Nazgul.
saves Faramir and
Yeah.
or whatever.
Well, it's interesting because he's both.
he's
right?
both.
He's
yeah,
both.
yeah, yeah.
He's both.
Well, and what that does is it shows you how powerful the Witch King is.
Yeah.
You're like,
He's-
I know
he's,
how
like, in his
powerful
prime, it
Gandalf
seems
is, and this guy's beating him.
Yeah.
Like, wow!
Yeah.
Imagine how powerful Sauron is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
yeah,
know?
yeah.
Well, and
it
that's
gives-
the
it,
other-
like, hints at
And
this
even
big scale.
and it's
that you
funny.
couldn't even-
Gandalf is like the lowest tier. Even Saruman's more powerful than him, and like,
Yeah.
Well,
well, I mean, you have
yeah.
you have Radagast, of course.
well,
the-
no, well,
the
but
black
he
sheep,
beats. But once he comes back as Saruman the White, he's essentially now as Gandalf the White.
Yeah.
He's essentially like
He's
I
taking
just,
Saruman's
He's like, I
place.
just leveled up, guys. This is-
Yeah.
you know, he's like,
Right.
he says, I'm what Saruman should have been.
Yeah, I am Saruman as he should have.
As
been.
he should have been. Yeah. Yeah, and that's super cool.
Well, and then back to the pity thing.
Right.
You know,
Pity party.
Saruman basically gets talked to death by the Ents, which is so funny. Like in the
Yeah,
movies,
that's
he
funny.
falls on the thing and dies.
right.
He gets speared. In the books, like the Ents have this language where like words would take too long to say to these people, so they just don't
hasty.
say them
Yeah.
because they're so hasty.
Right.
And so like he basically just talks Saruman like
Is that what happened?
yeah,
I didn't get there yet.
he's like yeah, he was up in the tower, but I just let him out because I talked to him until he shriveled up, pretty much. And then like they find him like walking, and he's just like this old rickety man who's like, I'm gonna cause some trouble,
Yeah.
and Gandalf's like. I guess we gotta just like let you go, because
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
what are you gonna do? You're just gonna like, Gandalf says like I think he's probably going to cause trouble eventually, but
Yeah.
like he's
Well,
not
but
going to
he's
like,
like, it's not our place to just murder him because he
Right.
might cause trouble.
yeah. But
Yeah,
it's
that's
so
kinda
funny, like
Yeah, that I hadn't really read it as that. It's like I talked to him until he shriveled up.
yeah.
But yeah, that is essentially what
Pretty
happened.
much
He's like he looked really miserable, so I let him out of more things because
He's like, I talked to him about things he wanted to hear, and he always came back for news. But then I talked to him about a bunch of things he didn't want to hear. These humans so hasty, And then he's
That's
like,
funny. That's
shriveled old man.
That's great.
Yeah.
Oh well, one other thing about the like Gandalf being overwhelmed is I just remember in the Pyre of Denethor, right? Basically,
Oh yeah.
as soon as the Witch King leaves, Gandalf is like, "Oh, I'm so tired," and Pippin runs up to him because Pippin just basically watched the Witch King blast down the door and be like, "Hey, I'm gonna kill everybody," and Pippin's like, "Gandalf, Denethor's gone crazy. He's gonna burn Faramir."
Yeah.
And Gandalf's like, you can just tell that Gandalf's like, oh my god, okay, give me a second. We're gonna go up there. I'll help out with this. He's like, I cannot be in two places at once.
Yeah.
I really need to be out there, but okay, I'll go help Denethor. And that was the
that's
the
such
biggest
an
moment where I
decision,
felt
too.
his weariness.
Okay. Yeah.
Where it's like, he basically admits
Yeah, I don't think
defeat
I
in
read it that
in
way,
that
but
sense,
yeah.
where he's like, I can't be in both of the. I can't solve both of these problems. He's like, I'm gonna go
He's
deal
like,
with
"Yeah, I think
Denethor and save Faramir.
I fear much sorrow will come of this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like, I can't solve all this problems right now.
Yeah,
He's like, I have
yeah.
to pick one.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because like
because he picks
from a
Faramir.
strategic point, you would think
Yeah.
like I just have to hope
Yeah.
hope Denethor doesn't actually
Yeah.
go too crazy.
Right.
And I'll go actually fight against the big bad,
Right.
But he chooses Faramir, which kind
Yeah.
of
Well, and it ends up
implies
working
like
out.
the importance
usual.
of Faramir.
Well,
Right.
this is
and the importance of a leader.
Well, and also
even though he knows Aragorn is coming.
I think it's
And,
also though
it's
like
you could kill off Denethor and Faramir. It wouldn't really matter because Aragorn's gonna show up, right?
But Denethor
Well-
can start polluting things from the inside.
Yeah.
Because he's kind of like leading the
Right.
city, sort of.
Yeah.
And with Denethor going crazy, like there's officially no one calling the shots in Gondor,
Yeah.
anymore. And he can't just like let that happen.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, let's fix this. Let's make sure that somebody's calling the shots who's supposed to.
Yeah.
And then we'll go out because like if everything is eating itself from the inside, well, it's being destroyed from the outside. It's
Yep.
like going to be this
Mm.
horrible
100%.
Yeah, you
thing,
can't do,
Yeah.
Yeah, then
Yeah.
it really can't
Well, and then
survive.
also just thinking about a little bit of switching topics.
Yeah.
But thinking about how like unconventional it is to have Sauron through the entire thing not be able to move. He's not even like he's
doesn't-
just like an
he's not a
entity.
He
corporeal
doesn't show.
He's
up.
like
I actually because I looked this up because he's not in the books. He's not like it's an eye on top of
Right.
the tower. He's just
Yeah.
kind of is like an eye somewhere.
You're right.
Apparently, at some point, Tolkien said that. I don't want to say it for sure, but I think I read somewhere that Tolkien basically said at this point Sauron did have a body.
Oh.
Mm.
But it's just but it almost doesn't matter if it has a body because he doesn't show up at all.
Yeah, he
So
doesn't.
his body doesn't do anything.
Yeah,
So-
like I was
so
thinking
it-
he would like march up Mount Doom and punch Frodo in the face and just like take the ring if he had a body,
Right.
Yeah,
He's,
right.
like right on his doorstep.
Yeah, he probably runs pretty fast. He's got
Yeah.
magic legs.
Right.
Yeah.
Boots of blinding speed.
Well, I think it's telling that he never described Sauron's form. He never
Yeah.
showed
Yeah.
he was standing there with his
Black
cloak.
cape and
Yeah, and
he's got
that's
spiky shoulders.
that's because it doesn't matter.
Doesn't
He-
matter.
He's,
Well,
he's operating from this
he is an
removed
eye.
place, and he's more described in form of shadow
Malice
and
and-
malice and emotion and like
pure evil.
Yeah.
spirit rather than
Yeah.
rather than like
Yeah.
Well,
his
and
physicality.
it's so
Doesn't-
it's just so different from like if Gandalf is his equal.
right.
Like Gandalf's like the boss that's like on the front lines with the workers, like trying to figure things out.
Yeah.
And then Sauron
yeah.
is just like up in the corner
he's,
office,
like, in his room.
like sending emails and making phone calls. Like
Yeah, he's like,
Just dictating.
yeah.
okay, Somebody deal with Minas Tirith.
Have you seen
already.
these stockholders? They're unhappy.
Nazgul, why don't you deal with this problem?
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty
Right,
much.
Right. Right.
I heard there might be some spy, some elvish spy over in by Cirith Ungol. Send over some orcs. Come on.
Yeah.
Snap, snap. You know.
Yeah. Right. Right. That's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, dude. There's so much in the book.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, it's crazy.
okay. So there was something I wanted to say about the large scale structure because you were talking about how it's such a good ending. Caterpillar. You were talking about how it's such a good ending, and yet it's
Well,
really
none
drawn
of us
out.
had finished it. But.
None of us have finished it, but like a good tail end, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like the I mean, we've all gotten past the the finale of Mount Doom.
Yeah.
You know, the ring is
The
destroyed,
climax.
and there's still whatever, like 80 or 100 pages left.
Yep.
Or more. I'm not even sure. But it's interesting because you kind of have that on the front end too, where there's like all the there's a whole sixth of the story is before they even get to Elrond, right? And there's all this kind of like Elrond is really the point where like the story picks up, and you're like, oh, okay, we're gonna go. Here's what the plot is.
Yeah.
You know. So there's all this time before that where they're like, I'm gonna go to Crick Hollow, but I'm really not. I'm gonna go to blah blah blah. We're trying to get to Rivendell because Gandalf said that's a good idea.
Yeah.
I don't really know what we're doing. Oh, I got stabbed. You know.
Yeah.
There's all this crap. Let's hang out with Bombadil. Blah blah blah.
Right.
And there's this really drawn out start, and then there's also a drawn out ending, and the middle books are so freaking dense.
Yeah.
There's so much plot happening.
Yeah.
Did you want to say?
Well,
that?
yeah, I just wanted to say that this is the spot in the book when
Yeah.
he destroys the ring. It's like
well, to be
it's
fair,
like
to be fair, it's
halfway.
there's appendices too. There's a crap load
Okay,
of
all
appendices.
right.
in this
Well,
Yeah. It's really not.
maybe then there.
book.
That's still
That's
appendices
still
stuff.
appendices.
Yeah, all right.
Is it?
Yeah.
But
All
the
right,
point
never
is,
mind.
The
The
point
po-
is, there's a lot.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
No, I was feeling that though.
There
I
were
was
like
I
three
was like-
chapters
Yeah, I was
afterwards.
like, I thought I was near the end.
Because in the
This is-
movie, it's
yeah.
like 15 minutes
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
20
Yeah.
minutes.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
Maybe not. I don't know. I haven't
Yeah.
watched
Well,
it in a
it's
while, but
pretty. It's more drawn out than a lot of movies.
yeah.
Where it ends and like the movie kind of keeps going,
Yeah.
and you're a little bit like, I thought we were done.
Yeah.
Is this like whatever? But yeah, it doesn't
But-
compare
but
to the
it's
book
like-
because
No
there's
way.
this whole other
Yeah.
problem at the Shire basically,
Well, and
which
also
would add a half hour to the movie. At
Also,
least.
I mean, to be fair, they're talking about
Here's what I mean.
like what's happening when they're dunking the ring in.
Duncan.
You know, like there's like the field of Cormoran is like
Yeah.
also happening
Well,
simultaneously.
how about that as a literary device?
Yeah.
Like to have two separate halves of your book and then to like tie them together with like, unique
the
moments where
linchpin,
they're
yeah.
like, where they're describing what Frodo and Sam are doing, and then they're like, at this moment, Theoden lay dying in the field.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Yeah, oh,
it's
it's
like so
Oh,
good.
that's
It's
amazing.
Such a great
That's so
idea.
good.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Because you can really sink into part of the story
Yeah.
without having to do the thing that most books do, which is bounce back chapter from A story to B story.
Yep.
Well, and
You
then
know,
like
it's so much
like
better. It's great.
when what's his name and what's her name are like
Mary and
no
Eowyn?
Faramir and Eowyn
Eowyn.
are
Okay.
like standing on the wall of Gondor,
Oh.
like all broken and hurt after the battle.
Yeah.
And then like they see something off in the distance, and then like a shimmer runs through like the whole city and the walls,
What
and
was that?
that's when they drop the ring in. They're like hanging out in
Oh.
Gondor, like, and she's like all pissed off because she's not going to fight,
Yeah.
and he's
Right.
like, it's okay, like we can't. What are we gonna do?
Yeah.
And then it's like doink, zhoosh, and they're just
Right.
like standing there from afar. So you get their perspective of Frodo and Sam
Yeah.
doing the deed.
Yep.
Their perspective of everyone who's fighting,
Yep.
and then the perspective of all the people who were injured in the fight and what
Wow.
is going on for them. And
Yeah.
it's just as cathartic at every story.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like with the people who are
Dude,
wounded,
that's
you're like
super
thinking
Yeah.
about all of their,
Yeah.
it's so
This
interesting.
singular moment of like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
affects
Affects
them
them
in,
all, yeah.
and in a particular way because of where they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
Wow.
like it hasn't quite reached the Shire. Like they go back to the Shire and things are still like kind of messed up.
Right.
You know,
right.
there's still like ruffians and
Yeah.
you know. So
yeah,
it's
and
like,
then it's their job to clean it up. you
Right.
know, Yeah. Yeah,
but the
that's so
king's
cool.
coming. That's what they say.
Right,
in that.
right.
It's kind of cool.
Dude,
Yeah,
that's super
that is
cool.
cool.
Yeah. Meat's back on the menu, boys. I was waiting for that. That quote's not in the book.
Yeah, it's
right.
not. It's
Yeah,
not.
Yeah,
That's a little bit
yeah.
contemporary.
Well, how do
Added
orcs know what
humor.
a menu is?
Yeah,
Yeah,
right,
exactly.
That's
right.
the Google search.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, apparently the people who worked on the movie, they like wrote a lot of the dialogue in the style of Tolkien, and so they had to like,
Right.
and you that comes across because like
Well,
so
yeah.
much of the dialogue is you know Tolkien-esque.
Yeah.
And so it like
Yeah.
it like holds up. You know.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, we could start talking about the movies now if we want. Like, just
Yeah,
we haven't rewatched them, so you know.
Yeah, maybe
I-
we'll,
we
we'll
don't-
do,
I don't
we'll
really
do
have a
another
lot of
podcast once we
memories,
rewatch them.
Yeah. I'm gonna run to the bathroom.
Okay, sure. But one thing I wanted to say about within the books is the way that different people talk, right?
Mm.
When you're in the Shire, everybody talks like little like farmer people, and they're
Yeah, like funny.
they're like, well, I gotta go back up the road to get some fish for my dinner or whatever. It's very like
It's like jovial.
it's super casual. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
very.
and, like,
It feels like hobbits.
It's
It-
super light.
Yeah, and their lifestyle is like reflected in the way they talk, right?
Yeah.
You have Sam's dickhead
Gaffer.
friend, no, his friend Tom Cotton or whatever his name is.
Oh yeah, right.
And he's like telling jokes, and he's like talking shit. He's like, Sam, you never saw that bird or whatever. And then you get later on, and people talk like in Rohan. People are like, the speech is totally different.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's very like regal. You can feel like the age of the civilization, and it's the same thing
Yeah.
in Gondor, right?
Mm.
Where there's just the mode of speaking is like different, and then you get to the orcs, and the orcs talk
Yeah.
like uneducated
Right.
slobs from Britain. You know what I mean? They're like, I don't want to do
Oh,
that.
I heard that you were walking with this guy.
Oh yeah, you're with the white hand or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because I feel like that doesn't happen. I mean,
Well, it's
a
just
lot of
so clearly
fantasy-
defined and well done.
Yeah.
You know, and like original
Yeah.
too. Well, I don't know. It's not original anymore, but like
Yeah. Well,
you know, and,
yeah.
and then like Frodo is so well, and the elves are all like professors. You know, they're like you everything that you say has to mean something and matter, or else they're just gonna like cut it up and
Yeah.
you know. And,
I remember.
But
I
then,
remember them. They mentioned like you have to be. What did they say? It's like you can't talk to an elf. Maybe I'm thinking of like a. Yeah, never mind. I'm thinking of like a Zen
nice.
guy that I heard. Where where it's like unless you're really in the moment, like
you
a Zen
can't
dude will
don't
just-
talk to an elf.
Right? Yeah. It's
Meditate before you go into.
Yeah.
You know.
If you're
the
not in the
forest.
moment, they will leave the conversation unless you're really invested in it
Oh,
too,
yeah,
because
yeah.
they're like,
Yeah.
I'm
Like
not
Zen
interested.
masters.
Well,
yeah.
and-
yeah,
and then,
I
like,
think it is a Zen thing.
Yeah, they're
but I
pretty
put it
much
onto the
Zen.
elves because they are kind of
They're
Zen.
like,
Well, and Frodo is
kinda
like
funny.
so they like instantly are like enamored with this small hobbit who
Who
like
like read some
who can speak a little of their
Yeah.
Elvish and
Elbereth.
yeah, and they're like, oh man,
Oh,
you're
he's
cool.
so cute,
Yeah.
little guy. Yeah.
They're like, you're welcome here
You're like-
anytime,
yeah,
buddy.
yeah. What's that guy's name?
Celeborn
Celeborn.
or Celeb
No.
Celeb
Gil.
is it?
Gil. The first guy he meets.
Gilgalad? No, he's
No.
old.
Yeah. Right when they meet. Right when they leave the Shire. The first elves they meet. I'll look it up. We got that book right here.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
don't remember.
I forgot.
Some of the elf people, I'm still like, I don't really know who that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ilmarith.
I don't
No.
remember who that is.
Yo,
Ilmar?
also is
Gildor.
Gildor.
Gildor?
I was so off.
Gildor. That's
Who is
that's
Celeb?
the
Celeborn.
Celeborn is the.
Celeborn.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Galadriel's husband.
right.
He's the
Yeah, it's
Lorien dude.
tricky because all the C's are in Elvish are pronounced with a K.
Ah, shoot.
Yeah.
I know.
Celeborn.
I always said.
I was
always
thinking like
said Celeborn.
celestial.
Right.
Yeah, I know.
You
Yep.
know, but
Yeah. No. Tolkien was like,
It's
nah.
Tolkien's
Yeah.
reasoning.
Yeah. There's a whole pronunciation guide in the Silmarillion.
Also, I
that's
wanted
very helpful.
to mention that like Aragorn's relationship with Arwen,
It's like not.
where
there.
is it?
It's not there.
It's
It was
like
added. It was mostly added. I mean,
like
during
it's
the
it's like
movies.
at the and it's also like
It's
exactly.
Very, it's
Yeah.
very.
It happens at the
briefly.
end when he sits on the throne and they're like, "Oh yeah, and we've been waiting for this for a long time."
Yeah, yeah.
And you're like, "Why?" I mean, I
Yeah.
get it, but like I don't remember. You know,
It
it's
is a little
interesting how
strange.
there's so much other build up and exposition on
Right.
all these other relationships and things, and like even Legolas and Gimli and the this and
Yeah,
that. And
yeah.
then
They kind
blah
of
blah
become
blah.
friends
But then
over
like
time.
these two who are like she's gonna be like the queen of all the realms, and you're
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
barely know like who she
yeah,
is.
that
you
is
know?
that is a weird point, especially because you have the whole thing with, which is emphasized, is the thing with Eowyn and Aragorn. How she's like
right.
she kind of is in love with him
Yeah.
because she has this sense that he's important and she wants to be like involved in stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So she
right.
kind of falls in love with him through that
Yeah.
dynamic, and he brushes her off
Because
because
he's
like,
got like this
he's
real
like, no,
bitch
I
back
already
at
have a
home.
girlfriend kind
Yeah.
of thing. But you don't actually see Arwen like
Right.
at all. So it's kind of like
Yeah. Well,
it's
that's the
weird
kind of thing
that they
you can-
emphasize that, but they barely even mention that Arwen is the reason.
Well, that's the kind of thing you can
It's kinda-
clearly tell in the movies.
fleshed
They're
out.
like, we need a romantic
Yeah.
aspect.
Well, I kind of
And-
like that they added
No,
that
but they
too.
did such a good job with
yeah,
it that
they
it
did.
feels right.
Yeah,
You know what
yeah,
I mean?
yeah.
And they're like, okay, well, Aragorn does have this
Right.
interesting relationship.
Right.
Let's flesh that out. And
Well, and
and apparently there was way more that
In, like, the
I forget
Unfinished
which
Tales or
movies. Maybe it was Fellowship, where Arwen like had a bunch of stuff cut out.
oh
Oh,
wow.
interesting.
Um,
Well, she saves him from the Black Riders at what. Like she
Right.
brings Frodo ahead, right?
Yeah, obviously
Does she
that's
do
not
that
in
in
the
the
book.
Well,
Oh, it's
no,
not.
in the
No, in
books,
the books,
it's
it's Gildor. or-
Gildor. No, it's not Gildor. It's
Is
one of
it,
the guys
um,
from
Yeah,
Rivendell.
one of the other guys.
Isn't it the main guy?
No, it's
Yeah, the other elf. It's hard to remember their names. They do kind of blur together.
Yeah, they do.
as-
And
as-
none of
as
them
characters.
are like dense enough characters to
Yeah.
really remember.
Yeah.
You know?
Trolls
Yeah.
do not build.
Because they're so like high above. You know, they kind of all have this air about them.
Yeah.
But you can't really
Glorfindel.
you can't really get into their personality because they're not really human like. You know,
Yeah.
they don't have a whole lot of flaws
Right.
to latch onto.
But yeah, so Glorfindel saves him, but they
Yeah.
cut out Glorfindel from the movie and they replaced it with Arwen so
Yeah.
that you could do
To
stuff. with
introduce
Arwen.
her, and
which is cool.
It's great.
What about when the elves show up at Helm's Deep? That doesn't happen in the book, does
That
it?
doesn't happen in the book.
Yeah, I
in
didn't
the
think so.
book, it is somebody else shows up.
It's Aemir and
Oh,
the Riders of Rohan.
yeah,
Oh, right.
yeah, it's the other
Yeah,
riders.
the other
right,
riders,
who
yeah.
were kind of out of the graces of Theoden because Wormtongue was telling Theoden not to trust Aemir.
Yeah.
kind of something
Yep.
like that.
Yep.
So they kind of show up because Gandalf runs into him. Gandalf goes and fetches him basically.
Yeah,
it's not
right.
just Aemir. It's Aemir and somebody else. It's like
Aren't there a bunch of other men?
Helm
Oh, yeah.
Hama, not Hama.
It's not gonna come to me.
I could look that
It's
up.
like
too.
Helmir or something.
Elfhelm.
Elfhelm.
Elfhelm. Yeah,
Is it
no, Elfhelm
He's
is
later.
Yeah, he's with the Grey Company.
Well, he's the leader of the Riders of Rohan when they go to Gondor.
Yeah.
He's like the leader of the Riders.
I didn't really stick. None of that stuff stuck with me
Yeah.
because I knew it wasn't really gonna matter that much. But
yeah.
I
I really liked Helm's Deep. That might be one of my favorite parts.
really,
Yeah.
it was my favorite parts in the movie, but I don't think it was my favorite part in the book.
Yeah.
It kind of like was really quick,
Yeah, it was.
You
Great.
know,
Yeah, it was.
but that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Another thing, not to like
Yeah.
gloss over, but
Sure.
another thing in the book that I think they did more interestingly in the movie. Well, maybe not more, but it was interesting with the those who are dead, how they jump
Yep.
off the ships and like
Yep.
kill all the
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, it's
Where
different.
It's much more
it's the-
streamlined.
It's the Dunedain in the.
and the men of.
Did you like it better in the books or the movie?
I really liked that the Rangers were like in it.
yeah.
He wasn't
Yeah,
like he wasn't the only Ranger.
Yeah,
But
I'm
I-
surprised they
it's
didn't.
the men of
I'm
Lebanon.
surprised they didn't go with
Yeah.
that, but I guess it adds more complications.
Yeah,
it adds
probably
more
would've been
like
hard.
pomp
To have the Rangers.
to Aragorn also as him being like the only one.
Yeah.
the only
Oh,
ranger.
sure, sure.
You know,
Oh,
he's
I,
like,
I was actually gonna say the opposite
oh really?
because it kind of gives you a sense that like these are all his old homies. You know
Oh,
what I mean?
yeah.
His
These,
men.
these
That's
are
how I
his
felt in the
old
book. It
guys,
was
and they're
super cool.
like,
Yeah, it's great.
and they show up and they're like, Aragorn, you're like the bomb. We love you.
Yeah.
We'll follow you into the scariest place in the world. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
they do. You know, they do.
Right.
But yeah, I know what you mean. Where it's like it makes him more singular. Where it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, I'm like the ranger.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's hard to keep track.
yeah.
It might have been harder to keep track in a movie. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, these
it's-
people-
It's easy to make. It doesn't feel like you're glossing over the dead guys because they're dead, so you don't care about. You're not like, where did they come from? What are they doing?
well,
It's
I was
easier
like
to
that
just
in the
to
in
just
the
like
book.
get rid of them, to like write them in and then out of the story because it's
Yeah.
just like, well, yeah, they had an oath to fulfill, but now they can be gone and we can streamline the.
Well, they
script
could
some
have
more.
just completely cut out the fact that they even went through the paths of the dead.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
because they
Well,
cut
I'm
out
glad
all this
they-
other
I'm so
crap.
glad they
I'm so
didn't.
glad they didn't too, because that's
Yeah.
one of the funniest parts of the
Yeah,
movies
yeah,
too.
yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting.
yeah.
It's so funny.
Yeah, really.
I can't wait to watch it.
Yeah, me too.
Um,
How long have we been going here?
Probably like hour and 10. I don't know.
Oh, really?
oh wow.
I feel like
I
it's
have
longer
no
than
clue.
that.
Should we take a little fiver,
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure.
refresh?
Sure. Yeah.
And like you could see like how the way they move.
Host of Saruman. The horns. Dude, that's crazy. The whole part with the horns. Oh, one thing I wanted to
Dude.
talk about.
Yeah,
Those are
Here.
like the evil trees
there.
kind of thing.
The crazy
One thing
trees,
I wanted
the
to talk about
horns.
with that whole interaction is the how basically evil men are represented. Like the
Mm.
bad,
Yeah.
you know, there's all the good guys.
That's
There's
a
a
great-
bunch of bad people too.
Yeah, in the
Yeah.
whole book, even
the whole book.
in Mordor.
It's not like just orcs.
It's not
Right.
just orcs. There's men all over the place. There's the men of Harad. There's the men of
the Easterlings.
Southrons, the
the
Easterlings
yeah,
and stuff.
Yeah, the wild,
Easterlings,
the wild men,
the wild men,
the
Dunland.
men
Yeah,
of Dunland.
yeah.
Yeah.
and yeah. So that's all they play a really big part in Helm's Deep, and then there's the weird men of the hills when
Oh,
yeah.
that's like the weirdest thing
Yeah.
ever with
Holy
Ganburigan.
cow.
They're like clicking and stuff
yeah,
or something.
and they're like play
Yeah.
drums to signal to each other, and they're like, you know, and they basically make a pact with I don't know if it's with
That's
Aragorn.
such
I think
or
it's
a
with
good
Aragorn.
it might be with Theoden
yeah, maybe.
because they're technically within
Yeah,
Rohan.
Aragorn's not around.
Aragorn's
Yeah.
in the Pass of the Dead.
Oh,
It's just
yeah,
the
you're right,
Riders of
you're right,
Rohan.
you're right.
Yeah.
But Theoden is basically like they're like we'll help you fight these little
We'll show you the secret
we'll
way
show you
if
the
you
secret
stop
way.
killing us.
if you stop killing us and you promise to never interact with us ever again. And Theoden's like, sure, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
And I just think it's great.
It's just these random like troll human mountain dwellers
Yeah.
like that
Yeah.
are just like
Oh,
we
and-
don't like all this.
And Pippin mentions that they remind him of the statues
yes.
that were on the switch back up to wherever that was.
Hadad
Dunharrow.
Dunharrow, right? Nice. There's so many names. It's crazy.
Yeah, it is.
But yeah, that's
Yeah, so
super cool.
it's implying that they're like, you know, the
They're like the
older race
ancient
of
people.
Men, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
kinda
yeah, yeah.
like-
yeah.
but they're
Like
not they're
Neanderthals.
not the Numenorians. They're not the.
There's some
you
other
know,
thing, you know.
They're like men who have been
Yeah.
here, kind of
Yeah.
forgotten about. You know, there's
Mhm,
all this.
And okay, here you go. This is the other thing that I had wanted to talk about before. Tolkien, I feel like, is not afraid of making things that are out of place or that feel weird, right? And probably some of this is I'm projecting my own the way I would write a story or the way
Yeah,
that I
yeah.
think about trying to make art or whatever. So there's certainly some of that in here, but I think it's very interesting how sometimes he's fine with things working out really nice, and other time and yet he's also.
What
can't think of
example
I
do you
can't think
think?
of any direct examples, but it kept on coming up where like
like Gandalf falling into the pit of the Balrog, or like lesser things.
Do you
than
mean
that?
no
bad
like
things
like
happening or like some
no
people
not
get
bad
away
things happening,
or
but
like,
no but like maybe like asymmetries in things that you would expect to be neater. He's not afraid to put something in there that's like that you're like, that's kind of weird, and then it doesn't really fit
Like
in.
the weird mountain guys.
Like the
Bombadil?
Weird Mountain guys are a good
Yeah.
example where it's like you're kind of like, why are they in the
But
story
see,
just for like 10 pages?
I
And
think
then
like
it's like
Bombadil, they would make more sense if this is the only thing you've ever heard. But once you look at the movies, they kind of are superfluous. Well, I guess that's why
well,
they
no,
were taken
but,
out of
no,
the
but,
movies.
but
is
that's
because
that's
they're
exactly
kind
my
of
point.
extra.
Is
Yeah.
Tolkien doesn't care that they don't do anything really else in the story. He's just like
He's
no,
world
these,
building.
He's
Well,
like no,
because-
these guys live here, and so when Theoden walks through this area, like he's gonna interact with those people.
Yeah.
And
well,
he
he's
doesn't.
he's
not
showing
worried
you-
about like, well, is that gonna be confusing? Is that gonna weird out the whatever?
Well, he might be.
Well,
but,
maybe, but
but I think he's showing you two things. He's showing you one, that there's a world outside of this story.
right.
You know, there's
is
like these
big.
things happening, which makes it feel so much more real
Yeah.
and not like obviously it's fantasy, but like there's like it's not just these fellowship and
Yeah.
these people who are at war. It's this whole ecosystem of a world.
Yeah.
You know, and
Yeah.
and the other thing is like all of this is made up. There before this book, were there other books with orcs and elves?
No.
No, there were like
maybe,
elves.
maybe some elves.
Like he
yeah.
had to fight his publishers and editors to make it a V in elves
and dwarves.
instead of and dwarves.
Yeah, because
instead of
everybody was like,
dwarves
it
and
should be
elves.
dwarfs.
Right.
Snow White and the Seven
he's
Dwarfs.
like, well, and just looking at those two words next to each other, it's like, wow, this one feels regal and this one feels stupid.
Yep.
You know, and he
Yep.
like really just,
Yeah.
you know,
Tolkien is
legend.
like
rangers,
legendary.
like halflings.
it's
It's
all
every class
directly
of
taken out of
D&D.
this book. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
The whole genre is it's
And just high
stolen
fantasy.
from the book.
yeah, it is.
The,
Yeah.
the impact of this book is like
Is unbelievable.
Massive.
Yeah.
And also the interesting thing that this is supposed to be one book
Yeah.
with several parts. He's
Yeah.
like, this is not 3 books.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's one story.
Well, and at this point it's 6 books, right?
right.
Once
Well,
each
and,
one's chopped
and the
up.
significant thing about that is that a lot of trilogies, most trilogies that we get, are released as trilogies.
Yeah.
Whereas this
Right.
and written as trilogies.
Yeah.
Where this was written as one book,
Yeah.
but released in 3 parts.
Yeah.
So like normally, like for example with the Wise Man's Field, King Killer Chronicles.
Yeah.
I've never read those.
It's
Got the Name of the Wind.
Patrick Rothfuss. It's a
Yeah.
more recent one.
Yeah,
I haven't
yeah.
read it, but I read a little bit. It's a very famous one.
Yeah. It's really good.
He's 2 books in, and there's so much hype about those 2 books that like he's
gotta write a good
reluctant to
third one.
come out with the 3rd one
yeah.
Yeah.
because it has to live up to this hype.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And part of it is like, how do you write the ending without being able to change the beginning?
Right.
Like there's so many things that
Well, it's like
come
Game of
back
Thrones.
around.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It
it's
was
like
so
you-
good and then it was
you-
horrible.
Like the good thing about writing one book is you can make things line up from the beginning to the end,
Yeah.
and you can say, oh, I need to end it like this. Let me change the fact or sprinkle this, foreshadow in it
Yeah.
earlier, and put something in the middle, and like it's such a weird way of writing to release the beginning without knowing what the ending is going to
Yeah, it is. You're
Yeah.
and
totally right.
it's creatively, it's how do you do that? I don't
Yeah, I have
it's,
no
It's
idea.
got to be a super difficult task.
And it's so interesting to look at Bilbo as a writer, like giving all of his
Oh.
notes and everything to Frodo,
Right.
Yeah.
and being like, make sure that you guys like really, once you look over it and it's all good, bring it back to me. I'll give you my final read through. And I'm like, oh, like he's just like living in this writing world all the time. So
Yeah.
like he knows how this. It
Yeah,
makes
there's a
him
little
as
bit
a
of that in
character of like a writer who turns to a poet at the end of his life, like so believable
Right.
because of these like little things where he totally like
Yeah.
understands that.
That's cool.
That's
yeah.
Tolkien.
Yeah.
Yeah, putting himself into it a little.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
But yeah, I have no idea, how to write a story like that. Yeah.
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 Well, as far as the impact, it's amazing that it's so lasting and that
Yeah.
nobody's been able to break through in the same way he did.
Yeah.
It's like groundbreaking, and people are all just kind of mimicking. And you could talk about Game of Thrones. There's plenty of great books that invent new races and things,
Yeah.
but this was so different that it like created its own genre.
Well, it's also interesting that he didn't really do anything else. Like he wrote the Silmarillion, and then there's like all these other like there's like how many volumes? 10 volumes.
The history of
Based on
Middle-earth.
his
Yep.
notes or something
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that. You know, so like he just lived in this world for
Yeah.
so long where like, you know, I don't know, other authors it's like, oh, it's my Starbringer trilogy.
Starbringer.
And then I've got the
I haven't read
trilogy
that
about the nude bloogers. You know, I don't know. It's like a totally
From the
read that.
author of the New Bloogers
Yeah,
and
it's
the
like a-
Starbringer
it's like a
trilogy
totally
comes
different-
the Bindledorfs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, he's just like living in this whole world
Yeah,
like
yeah.
only. You know?
Yeah, it's really cool, and I would definitely recommend the Silmarillion.
Yeah. I think I should definitely read it. flip
Because
through it.
in large part that's like the most high level view of his whole canon that you have, right? So and in a lot of ways I've heard it said that he thought of the Lord of the Rings as the sequel to that.
Well,
Because throughout that you have like this whole backstory for this whole world that he almost created a world so that he could create languages for the world because he's a linguist.
Yeah.
And
This is actually the byproduct of a byproduct. He came up.
Yeah.
He wanted to make languages, so he made
Yeah.
a world for them to reside in.
Yeah.
To make them believable, and then his fans liked The Hobbit, so they like kept asking him to make a sequel to The Hobbit.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Oh, I guess I should.
He's
I
like,
guess
I'll write something.
I guess I'll
with
write
hobbits
something
in
with
it."
hobbits in
Yeah.
it."
Yeah,
Wow.
That's what he said.
And so that's why it took so long, was because it wasn't his main thing. His main
Right.
thing was crafting this world,
Yeah.
this mythos, and that's why it's so thick
Yeah.
and rich and
Yeah.
good. And
Have
he just
you-
happened to be an excellent narrative writer too.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
You know,
I
the,
heard
the fact that he could do both of those things well is
Yeah.
miraculous.
Kind of insane.
you know?
Yeah.
somewhere I saw that Lord of the Rings is like, and this whole thing is like Tolkien's representation of like prehistoric Europe or something like that.
Yeah.
you
That
know?
so that there's a letter in the beginning of my edition of the Silmarillion, which I don't actually have here, where it's basically a letter to his editor or to the publisher or something, where he's basically like explaining. He's like, "Look, I know you want me to write all these books that people are actually going to read, but I have this really good one that I really like, and it's my main thing." And it's hard to read
The
because I
Silmarillion.
essentially am trying to make a mythology for Europe, because
Wow.
Europe and England in particular has kind of a boring mythology. All we have are these stories about King Arthur and stuff. And he's like, I wanted to come up with a real backstory for Europe.
Wow.
And he's like, so that's kind of what this is. He's like, it incorporates all these themes that I think are important in European history.
Yeah.
And he's like, and blah blah blah. He's like,
And he says something like, the reception that I've gotten proves to me that other people wanted this kind of thing too.
Right,
Wanted,
right.
And he's like, this is proof. This reception is proof that fairy stories aren't just for children; they're for adults too.
right.
Wow.
Yeah, that's so cool.
That's
And
amazing.
so this was his because he was really into fairy and that kind of like
Like all the old
supposedly
tales.
childish tales.
yeah.
Like and today fantasy is regarded as just another
It's just another
genre.
right.
So when did he put the Silmarillion out in relationship to
Well,
Lord of
the
Rings?
Silmarillion was published, I think,
It's
like a
published
year
after.
after he died or something, in
Oh,
like
wow.
78 or something like that.
What?
Yeah, it was around then. So basically, this came out in like 54 or something.
And it technically wasn't done. Christopher Tolkien had to kind of
yeah, he
construct it,
glued it all together.
and
Wow.
fill in little bits and
Although I
piece
think
it together.
I think it was semi-ready for publishing.
Yeah,
From what I
yeah. Large portions of it were complete, but
Yeah.
he had to kind of.
yeah.
Glued together.
Yeah, so Christopher Tolkien did a lot of the like follow-up work
Yeah,
of all of his father's stuff.
yeah, and they were still releasing books.
They're
like
still-
they,
they
they
st-
came out with one like 2 years ago or something.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's like based
and
on
I think
the-
that's gonna be the last one,
supposedly
from his original writings.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah,
Fall
so
of
basically, so
Gondolin.
he was writing the Silmarillion like through his whole time as an adult. You know what I mean? Like once he got after the war, I think maybe even in World War I, he was writing. He was coming up
He was
with the
coming up with
very
it in his head,
early
too.
aspects of this
Yep.
world, and it's so crazy that it all can all like work together, and you can
Mhm,
actually
mhm.
like read about the whole thing as one thing,
Yeah.
and it's just so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely read. You guys gotta. Well, you already read it, but Silmarillion
and,
is
it's
super cool.
it's also interesting. Like when I was younger, I got like obviously we were all super into Star Wars, and I used to get those cross section books of like all
Yeah.
the spaceships. But then I also had this one book. I actually kind of want to try to find it, but it had like detailed descriptions of like every character. It was just after the movies came out, so it was like portraits of the actors in like their full garb from the movies, and it gave like descriptions of each character, and then it also like gave descriptions of like their gear and stuff, and like
Was
Okay.
that like
Like-
the complete guide to characters?
something like that.
Because they had a bunch of those. I had like the complete guide to ships, and they had one that was a complete guide to weapons. And,
Okay.
Yeah,
and it would have little data sheets that like had little blurbs and a picture. And
yeah, and like just the thickness of that, like world building, character creating.
Mhm.
And then like I just remember spending hours like looking at these characters and races and things, and like it just sucks you in with like wonder. And
Yeah.
I don't even know, like I'm trying to think of like what the real world application of all that time is. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And it's so interesting, like this stuff is it's like, why does this pull us in so hard? Like it's so cool to like go and hang out with Frodo and Sam while they're going through the worst place ever
yeah,
to try to dunk this ring in.
Yeah.
And it's like, why do we want to do that, and why does that interest us so much?
yeah,
And then like I don't know, like what it's like universally renowned, and it's such an interesting thing,
Yeah.
just like
Yeah.
fantasy and
yeah.
I spent
Well, just story.
Yeah.
I mean, the ability to say. I think it's really about identifying with the characters. At least, for these books, I was constantly being like, man, like, what if I was there? Or like,
Yeah.
what is that like? Like,
Mm.
like, wow, they decided to do that. What would I have done? You're constantly kind of like
Yeah. The choices
naturally-
of Master Samwise. right?
naturally being like, wow, he did that, and then like, or like, yeah, I probably would have done that, or something.
Yeah.
That's the natural thing is to read it through
Yeah.
your own eyes.
or just thinking like, wow, that guy is so cool.
Yeah,
Like that's
Yeah.
the coolest thing
Aspiring to-
ever.
yeah. yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like when they're talking about the Rangers, and it's like
Yeah.
that's so badass.
Yeah.
yeah.
In another life maybe I will become a
Right.
mountaineer
Yeah.
Yeah.
bow guy. I
Yeah.
don't-
Yeah.
it's like
Well,
Yeah. Well, and
Yeah.
that's how we derive our sense of what we should be, right?
Yeah.
Is like, wow, Gandalf's so wise. Like,
Right.
I
Yeah. I
wanna be
wish
like
I was
that.
as wise as Gandalf.
Or he's
Frodo's
so
so like
Yeah.
soft and thoughtful
Yeah,
and
yeah.
like quick-witted.
kind,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I think all of that is about like it appeals to us because we can see something that we want to be. Right?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
I want to
Yeah.
be like him. Right?
Yeah, and we're all on this journey, like, and we hope it like works out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
like, where's my I don't know, whatever,
Mount Doom.
Yeah.
Mount Doom.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're constantly like this is so difficult what they're going through,
Yeah.
and yet they persevered, and
Yeah.
then it's inspiring
Mm.
to be like,
Dude.
like whatever trials I have, there's a way through, and not only that, but these characters' determination to find a way, even when they're like, they know there's no hope, or
Dude, the
Yeah.
last the
the
second
Frodo
half,
and Sam stuff is so
It's
when
so
they're
deep.
going through Mordor,
So
it's amazing
gripping.
how for a whole book and a half, you've basically just been seeing them get more and more tired.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Ever since as soon as they leave the Fellowship, it's just
Yeah.
like, man, we're gonna have a lot to do here,
Yeah.
and they just like keep like slogging.
They like
through,
run
and-
out of
and-
food, and
Yeah, they run out of food.
they're like barely finding the water in
Yeah.
Mordor. Like,
Oh.
yeah, they're still humans.
Yeah.
Like they're not humans. They're still living beings, like walking through this place.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
they still need water.
Yeah,
Like
Yeah.
they
And
can run out.
and they
Yeah.
and they just collapse
Yeah.
afterwards. Like
Yeah.
Frodo, what does it say? Frodo, after he took a sip of water or something, it's like Frodo fell to the ground and lay there like a dead thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's one of the lines when he's in Mordor,
Wow.
and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like they're like near the end.
Yeah.
You know, they're
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
they're like near death.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All the way through Mordor, and it's
They're just like taking little rests
Right.
and
right short rests,
pushing
long
through.
rests,
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
using those hit dice.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. So
So and that leads into D&D, which we're about to go play.
Yeah. Yep.
Super excited.
Yeah.
And it's like, thanks to Tolkien, we have this mythology to
whole-
work with.
this
I mean,
whole
we're
framework.
really still working within his world to some degree.
Yeah.
Like,
Totally.
My character's a halfling who
Yeah,
like
you're
shoots
literally
stuff.
a hobbit.
I'm
Yeah.
literally a hobbit.
Yeah, and it's like,
It's
Literally,
kind of,
not figuratively.
It's kind of funny
I am
that
a hobbit.
it's funny that I mean, maybe it's like a license. It's probably a licensing thing where they can't use the word hobbit because that's owned by the Tolkien estate.
Yeah,
or something.
probably.
Yeah.
But it's funny that there is kind of this like, well, no, I'm not a hobbit. I'm a halfling. It's like, okay, but a halfling is directly just taken from the book called The Hobbit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right.
There's no space in between those, and it's kind of just funny that I don't know that there's that like distinction.
Right.
Yeah.
These are halflings.
But it's like, this is such a good world that you want to be in
Right.
that like, it's like, might as well use it. I mean,
Yeah.
there's other
Yeah.
RPGs that use different worlds and have different weird aliens and
Right.
I think, it strays into sci-fi once you get into different races, because it's like fantasy is almost defined as what Tolkien did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you do
We could just
something
call it
too different, it
Tolkienism.
becomes, oh, but this is
Tolkien.
another planet because they have green skin. This
Right.
is aliens. These are aliens.
Yeah.
But it's like, what, elves are aliens in a sense.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
Yeah.
but there's humans there too, so it's like
yeah.
it's grounded in our world.
Well, and it's grounded in like the time period too. How there's like castles and
That's true,
swords.
that's
That's
true.
a big part of it.
yeah.
Yeah, well,
that's
and
true.
it's like, Star Wars is sci-fi, Lord of the Rings is fantasy.
Right.
Like if you're flying in starships, shooting blasters, you're fantasy,
Right.
or you're sci-fi.
Yeah.
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 If you got a
you're-
sword,
if
it's
you got a
probably
sword, it's
Yeah.
fantasy, and there's magic.
Yeah, and it's
you
funny
know.
that those are the two.
Yeah.
You know.
What are you hitting things with? A real sword or
Right.
a laser sword?
Right.
Yeah.
Is it past or future?
Right.
Right. That's an interesting distinction.
Yeah.
'Cause
And
there's
it's
not that much
interesting that
that's-
none of that stuff really takes place in the present either.
Yeah.
Like there's
well,
not a lot of present time role
Well,
playing.
you wouldn't call it. You would
Grand
just call
Theft
it
Auto.
fiction. You would just call it fiction, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not fantasy. It's not sci-fi.
Yeah, it'd be like a spy thriller or
Yeah.
like a,
James Bond.
yeah, that kind
Right,
of that kind
Born
of
Ultimatum.
But
kind of
as
thing.
soon as you start adding an alien, then it's sci-fi.
Right.
Because it's like, well, maybe it's because you're in the present, but like aliens haven't arrived yet here, so you're like assuming
Yeah.
it's the future.
right, yeah.
Like if an
Alternate-
alien
alternate
came down in a James
realities.
Bond, you'd be like, must be the future. There's an alien.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
he just went to some secret place in Nevada.
Where they have the
Right.
aliens.
So they have aliens now.
Ooh, yeah.
That's
Oh,
a whole other
man.
podcast.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been great. I think
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we've kind of covered it. I
Yeah.
think we super enjoyed these books. They're
Yeah, there's some of the best
Can't wait
books
to
ever.
so
finish.
good.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Yeah,
then
we'll
watch
all
the
be
movies.
finishing in the next couple
Yeah.
days.
Yeah, I'm super stoked to watch the movies.
Yeah, I
don't-
can't wait.
There's so many parts I'm like, I don't really remember how that goes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can't wait to see that again.
Yeah, dude.
The battles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's gonna be great.
Yep.
All right.
Cool.
Cool.
Peace.
Yeah, well, thanks for watching. See ya.
Later.